Today, we return to the library of the true aesthete for part 2 of our tour of his one-of-a-kind library. We will learn about his special collection of editions of The Secret History by Donna Tartt, as well as explain the core features of the dark academia aesthetic. We will also discover more about the true aesthete's theory of aesthetics, and then apply it by reviewing together a series of artistic works in detail. We will explore the ideas of Freud, Jung, plus the Enneagram, and the psychology of the artist and the aesthete through works on introversion and a series of books on the subject of the highly sensitive person. We highlight near the end of the tour the true aesthete's collection of Blu-ray discs and his interest and appreciation of high art in its audiovisual long-form medium of the Prestige television series, and we discuss this medium's parallel with the novel. Following this part 2 of the tour, we have scheduled a third part, a live AMA, or Ask Me Anything, where you can ask the true aesthete any question you may have. Just leave a comment down below and I will ask your question on your behalf, or register to attend our live Zoom AMA in the first link in the description. Either way, we will get all your questions answered and the recording of the AMA will be published on this channel. There are also bonus resources that go along with this bookshelf tour in the first link in the description. There's a book giveaway, which includes a red leather special prize binding edition of the Oxford Book of English Verse, plus you can download the high-resolution photos of the True Aesthetes library. You'll also get my Classics Resources spreadsheet, which collects in one place all the key details for the major facing page translation book sets like the Loeb Classical Library and the E. Toddy Renaissance Library, and other classical libraries by HUP, as well as other presses. You'll also get a new bonus that I just recently assembled, a PDF guide with all the tips and tricks I learned about how to keep a library and how to improve your reading from 55 plus hours of bookshelf tours I've done over the past couple of years. Lastly, if you'd like to do a bookshelf tour with me, please email timothy@timothykenny.com. Now, let's get into the bookshelf tour with the true aesthete. All right, so we're back now looking at this shelf in the bedroom. And so we'll head over to the close-up photos and jump in here. So,
yeah, let's
where do
do
you want
this
to get
again
started?
vertically.
Okay.
Yeah, let's start right at the bottom. So this is by Leopardi, who we've went over previously, and this is a collection of his letters. So he wrote many letters to friends and colleagues he had. Really beautiful and really interesting to read for anyone who either can't get hold of the Zibaldoni, his large notebook, or other works. I just want to read a brief passage from here, which I think will put a nice pin on Leopardi. So he's writing to his friend Giordani here on the 30th of April, 1817. And he's saying, "Nobody has any interest in my things, and that's fine, but it is much less so with other books. Indeed, I shall tell you without conceit that our library has no equal in the province, and there are only two others which are less good. Over the door is written that it was created for the townsfolk, and in theory it's open to everyone. Now, how many people do you think make use of it? Nobody, ever." So you can see there, his father had a very grand and large collection of books which Leopardi made use of, and you can see there his thoughts on his father's library and his own works. But yeah, brilliant author. And we have Orwell's 1984. I think everyone watching this will probably know of that. Highly recommended novel. So I only read this relatively recently, a couple of years ago. Really interesting to read, obviously, nowadays. Then we have here Slim volume, which is a play by Tom Stoppard. So this guy actually recently passed away as we're speaking. I didn't know anything about this guy, actually. I can't even remember how I believe actually this came up when I was looking into books on love. So the title just drew me. But yeah, I just recently found out that he passed away, but I believe he was a very or semi-famous figure.
There's
From
sort of an
England, I
interesting
believe.
pattern in novels recently, and especially romance novels, where
Mm.
the title makes it sound like it's a nonfiction or self-help book, but then it turns out it's actually a novel.
Mm.
So,
It's
which
true,
again
actually,
gets
yeah.
at the interesting thing that I mentioned earlier, which is the interpenetration of fiction and nonfiction,
Yeah.
and how those sort of work together, left hand, right hand.
Yeah. Or ambidextrous, as Leonardo da Vinci was. Sorry, he's on my mind. A friend mentioned his notebooks, which I've been meaning to buy a copy of.
And also would write in mirror so that
Yeah.
people couldn't read it.
Mm. Yeah, so then again, all of these books are kind of randomly ordered for anyone curious about the ordering, but we have a slim copy of Marcel Proust. I think that's just an excerpt of his work, In Search of Lost Time. We have we have a volume here by James Romm, a modern author, called Dying Every Day, Seneca, the Court of Nero. So after I finished Seneca's letters, I wanted to see what his life was like and other, related historical events and the history, things like this, because I was still reading Roman history at the time. So this is a really highly recommend this volume to anyone with an interest in Seneca specifically, or the Roman Emperor Nero. Really interesting information in there. And we have Ruskin's famous work, Sesame and Lilies. Ruskin was a famous British, possibly artist, or at least he wrote, he may have been an artist and also wrote a lot on art and aesthetics and related subjects. Proust mentions and speaks very, very highly of Ruskin. I believe Proust actually may have translated Ruskin into French because Ruskin was an English author. And I believe Proust, one of the early exercises he did was actually translating many of Ruskin's works into his native French. He spoke very highly of Ruskin, and he had a very large influence on Proust. So yeah, really nice little work, really interesting items there. Okay, then we have the final. This is the second pin we can say of Leopardi. So this is his moral fables. So there's two works in here. I think the reason I bought this one is because it contains his pensieri, or thoughts. So as the title suggests, it's a small collection of thoughts, very similar to the Zibaldoni.
And Pascal has a very famous work called Pensées, and that's French for thoughts, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
I think that's just at the top of this very photo, actually, possibly, if not the next couple of shelves.
Oh, really?
Yeah, let's have a look. Is it on this shelf? Yeah, there it is. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
near the top. Yeah, maybe I should put those two together. Yeah, if we return back, so we have a slim volume of Bacchylides poems, complete poems. So Bacchylides is an ancient Greek poet who's included in the Loeb poetry series we looked at the very beginning. Then we have a modern take on the Borgia family, as we've discussed previously. This is by Meyer. I found that was a really, really good work, and anyone interested in the Borgias. And moving up, we have a really good collection. This is it's a whole series by Oxford. I don't want to say Oxford Standard Authors, but that may be the wrong title of the series. But either way, Oxford have a whole series of books on a particular author, and they include a lot, if not all, of that author's work. So this is an English philosopher called Thomas Browne, produced some famous works. One's called Urn Burial, Hydrataphia, I believe is the name of another one, and a work on gardens, and then lots of philosophical works as well. But I think he was writing in the 1600s, really interesting to read. Then we have an interesting work here by Norah Vincent, sadly passed away, called Self-Made Man. So she may be relatively well known these days. So she disguised herself as a man. So she was a woman, obviously, Norah Vincent. She disguised herself as a man. You can see there her clothing and her get-up. And she just wanted to see what life was like for men. So she disguised herself as a man, really put on the part. And she documents her experience living as a man in modern life. I think she was writing maybe 10 or 20 years ago, something like this, if not a little earlier. But yeah, she had a lot of mental episodes after this, and her experiences undercover as a man, greatly contributed to that. And many people say that it was her experience going undercover as a man that kind of contributed to her suicide, sadly. But
There's
yeah, highly recommend this to any women, and especially anyone in relationships with a man.
there's a interesting trend happening on LinkedIn right now, and I guess I don't know
Really?
how big of a trend it is. It's probably pretty minor, but I guess a woman wrote an article within the last few months about how she found that her organic reach on LinkedIn was not the same as her male friends, and so she
Right.
had them all post the same thing and see what kind of reach they got. But then
Mm.
also some women are changing their name and some of their other ways they describe themselves to be more masculine coded,
I
and
see.
finding that it helps them in job applications or other stuff like that. So
Mm.
it became a little bit of a trend for people to start doing this and experiment with it over the last couple days. And there's plenty of interesting experiments where people change various demographic features of themselves and apply to
Mm.
jobs and get differential
Mm.
results. So it's in a long line of those kind of social experiments.
Mm. Yeah, really interesting read, though, for men and women, but especially women, and even more especially those seeking to understand what life is like for men.
And also just
Uh,
there's a long intellectual
mm,
history of the phrase self-made man, and I don't know if she
mm,
talks about that at all in the book, but there's a lot of criticism of that and American culture. If you read stuff within American studies, the scholarly literature on that, that's a much critiqued concept. And there was just Zoran Mamdani was sworn into office as mayor of New York City
mm.
yesterday on New Year's, and one of the
All
things
right.
he talked about was making a change in the culture of New York City from rugged individualism to more of a communitarian ethos, and
Mm,
that self-made man concept is very closely linked within American
mm,
studies to rugged
mm,
individualism. So and just American masculinities. So there's some interesting stuff there for people that want to go into the sociology of that.
Yeah, then we have one of a few, well, I couldn't find the rest, but this is one of the Oxford, I think it's Oxford, right? Very short introduction series. So this one's on cognitive neuroscience. Then moving up, so this is a really interesting work on sexuality. So it's called My Secret Garden by Nancy Friday. So she's collected a whole bunch of first-hand accounts slash stories slash fantasies of various women of all walks of life, and it's put together in this little volume here. There's a modern day version. I can't recall the actress's name. She's a very famous actress who's doing the same thing, actually. I'm not sure on the progress of her volume, but she's also doing the same thing, collecting together female fantasies. But this is a really interesting work, published around 50, 60 years ago, I think, in the mid-90s. Really interesting to read on anyone who wants an insight, especially into female sexuality.
You could say it's sort of the, in contrast to this, it's maybe one that men should read to understand more about women.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's a good point. I might put those together in a review Oxford short introduction.
And also, I was just thinking within this genre of sort of like gender switching, there's also just really interesting journals. And the one that comes to mind is the founder of Dramatica, which is I think one of the most, almost the sort of, if you're interested in Jung and archetypes and the hero's journey, it's sort of similar to that. I view it as kind of the next stage of it in a sense, but and I forget if it's one founder or a number of founders, but one of the founders is trans, male to female, and there's some really interesting journals of that experience and just kind of going in the opposite direction, but sort of somebody who's experienced life from one perspective and then going through the opposite. Journals of people transitioning, and there's even people on YouTube that talk about this kind of stuff. It's really interesting and sort of a unique experience you can't get any other way of just individuals' experience going through life from both perspectives and giving an inside look at what that's like and things you take for granted and how you're treated differently. So I think it's some of the most profound stuff, and we live in these echo chambers that are more siloed than any time in history. We're living in very abnormal times where your feed is perfectly tuned to just people like you or people who share the exact same sense of humor and interests. And so it's more important than ever to get outside your echo chamber and see things from other people's perspectives. So this kind of stuff is really important. And to be a good storyteller, that's why I got into Dramatica. That's why I thought it was so interesting, because there's a lot of these jokes you'll see, like YouTube shorts, for example, on Book Talk, of like, oh, look at this. Like, here's a bunch of stereotypes about women of men who write female characters and they don't really understand women. So this kind of stuff is especially important if you want to be a good storyteller and write good dialogue. You really need to understand people that are different from you in order to generate accurate and high quality characters and dialogue. And I think the challenge of, as a man, writing female characters and vice versa is one of the most interesting elements of that. So, and Mad Men is kind of a good example of that, of like, people really like the writing and the gender contrast there. So I think, and there we have Mad Men. That I must have, I'm picking up a lot of stuff unconsciously here. No, I didn't. That's totally, that's funny. I'm primary processing right now.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah, as we see here, the real Mad Men. This is I bought this after I watched the show, so this is talking about the real version as opposed to the semi-fictionalized version of 60s advertising we see in the show Mad Men.
And Mad
So
just comes
interesting
from
to
Madison
read.
Avenue, for people that
Yes,
don't know.
exactly.
Probably most people do know
Yeah.
that, but just in case.
Yeah, so nice little volume there. We have the Silvae Statius. So I mentioned Silvae way back in the main bookcase. I kind of remember now who authored that volume of poetry called Silvae, but this is the original collection. So this is a collection of poetry called the Silvae by this ancient Roman poet called Statius.
And Silvae is forest, right?
I'm actually not sure. You may be right, yeah, because Sylvanus is like a forest creature. So yeah, you may be right.
Okay, I'll look that up while we go.
Yeah. That volume without a title on the spine, I've got it here to remind me, is The Doctrine of the Mean and the Great Learning by Confucius. So after I read Confucius's Analects, I bought this really, really slim volume, another one of his philosophical works, which I thought sounded interesting. And then we have two more philosophical works. So Pascal's Pensées, as we mentioned. And then we have Mencius, a work by Mencius there. And if we look at the top here, we have three works all on the Enneagram. So this is kind of an aspect of, or a way to kind of decode your personality. It's along the lines of the Myers-Briggs personality test, which I think a lot of people will be familiar with. So I'd heard of that, but then I also heard of this Enneagram flying around on the internet. So I decided to buy a few books on this. That fat volume at the bottom that we're looking at there, that one is the one I'd recommend to people if they're interested in this, because that's the most, it goes the most in depth, and it also has, I believe, a short survey where you can find your own Enneagram type. So if anyone's interested in these three, I'd highly recommend that bottom one there by Riso and Hudson. They're all by Riso and Hudson, actually. Yeah.
Out of the various personality systems, the Enneagram has the most close connection to a spiritual interpretation of it. But I think there's deeply buried in even the big five. And you see this with the hexaco model, which is sort of the dark triad. And I think there's something else in there also. But basically, part of the big five is they wanted to strip personality of good and bad. They wanted it to be just sort of neutral. And with that hexaco, they've added back in what they stripped out before. And even within, I'm preparing a course on this stuff. So I've looked very deeply into the intellectual history of it. And basically there are, especially for hiring purposes, and just for sort of measures of lifetime success, financial, but even marriage success and otherwise, there's certain of the big five that are highly correlated with success and are sort of considered good. So even though sort of superficially they're described by the professional literature as all of equal value, there actually is submerged beneath the surface a sort of Vitruvian man or ideal person within the facially neutral big five and its various facets. So, and then you add the hexaco, dark triad, dark tetrad, or whatever. There's some various additions they bolted onto it. But yeah, so you can't really fully separate these personality models from the values that go along with some of these facets and traits.
Yeah. Yeah, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, Big Five, those are the three that I've heard of.
And Myers-Briggs is connected to Jung's work. So that's another thing that's often left out, is there's a very direct line to Jungian archetypes with the Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs is not considered neither is the Enneagram. They're not really considered scientifically valid, which I don't put the most stock in, so I don't really care. I think the Enneagram is really, really interesting, and so it doesn't matter to me so much that it's not considered scientifically valid, but within the scientific literature, the big five is kind of the 800-pound gorilla, and nothing. They don't spend too much time on the other ones.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing Jung's connected to the Myers-Briggs. You've just set a set a note off in my head. Yeah, I'll have to look into that because I remember someone mentioning that, but I didn't know that from the offset. Yeah.
Yeah, so did you
Yeah,
want to
that
say
can.
anything about any of these other ones, or I wasn't sure?
No, I think that
Okay.
concludes this shelf here. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah, so a few more on this shelf. So let's do the exact same thing, go vertically top to bottom. So I'm surprised I still have this. So I stopped reading this. I vividly remember I was in the garden and I thought it was a bit boring. But this is a work on ancient libraries. I say boring, but I think that's because it goes very academic and very scholarly and in depth. I thought this book was more of an easy, less in depth work on ancient libraries. Probably this is a series of essays all on ancient libraries, ancient wisdom, and collecting and systematizing that. Then we have another volume by Balzac. Actually, it looks like I've got 3 by him now, called A Treatise on Elegant Living. So this is a kind of aesthetic work that Balzac wrote, very short, really interesting to read. And we have Jung, who we just mentioned, Modern Man in Search of the Soul. I believe I bought this because it's the one that people seem to say is the best work to read as an introduction to Jung. I may be wrong on that, but I think that's the reason I bought this one. But it's kind of a bit burnt out on psychology I think I read this straight after Freud, but I'm really interested in Jung now, so he's someone I'm really looking forward to reading.
how'd you get into Jung?
Well, after I read so I read all of Freud, or most of, well, I won't say all. I read a lot of the volumes we'll see just very shortly on Freud, most of his major works. And then when I started a new job, I actually had a colleague there who I started talking with, and he mentioned that he's reading Jung at the moment and he finds him really interesting. And I said, "Oh, I haven't read Jung. Of course, I know of him, but I have read Freud." So we had quite a few discussions, me talking about Freud and him talking about Jung, and it's mainly through him that I developed a strong interest in Jung. So yeah, very interesting guy. Seems much more interesting than Freud the more I learn about him.
Mhm.
Then we have kind of the companion to Orwell's 1984. It's another dystopian novel, Huxley's Brave New World. What's so amazing about Grace, I'm surprised that I have this. This is given to me by a friend, which I need to return to him. I can't tell you much about it. I never flicked through it or opened it, but this is something a friend gave me.
Zondervan is a well-known Bible and Christian publisher,
Yeah.
but I'm not familiar with this Connect branding.
Mm.
But yeah,
Yeah. Then we have Aristophanes' Clouds. Aristophanes is an ancient Greek playwright, but he wrote comedies. Kind of gave us, I believe, in this play here, The Clouds, he gives kind of a very mocking depiction of Socrates.
and Aristophanes has sort of a pattern of naming a lot of his plays these seemingly like trite
Mm.
things like clouds, frogs, and birds.
Yeah.
And it's important to understand he's kind of like what I was suggesting earlier about the use of camouflage and sort of metaphor to satirize politicians or satirize or talk about things that are taboo. That's part of his method of critiquing his society. And so I wouldn't let the seemingly odd naming pattern he uses dissuade you from reading his stuff, because he really is considered top notch.
Yeah. Yeah, you can add him onto the ancient trio, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. So Aristophanes is the light-hearted comedic writer.
Are they on your lobes here? I feel like
No,
no. Okay.
I went over those 3 in the large Folio Society orange set I have near the start
Oh,
of
okay.
the previous videos. Yeah. So we have a slim volume, James and Norah, Portrait of Marriage. So this is discussing James is James Joyce and his wife Norah Barnacle, I believe her second name is. So this is a
Oh,
very
cool.
slim volume that discusses their marriage. Yeah, of course, famous James Joyce and Norah, famous for their vulgar letters, love letters, you could call them, that they exchanged between each other. So people can look up James Joyce's love letters to Norah if they're interested in
Oh,
that.
cool.
Yeah, very amusing for anyone who hasn't read those. Then we have Green's 48 Laws of Power, which I think is very famous. Everyone will know that, and we discussed previously as well, with his book on seduction, which we went over.
Do you
And
think
then
it
the next
stands
volume
up
there.
in terms of
Mm,
like if somebody reads more? Because a lot of people will think, oh, this is just
mm,
another popular self-help book. But
mm,
I really consider Robert Greene's work as in a class of its own in terms of popular
mm,
stuff. Like you wouldn't really expect a
mm,
book that has this amount of research into it and kind of serious tone
mm,
to do well. And so it really
mm,
is in a league of its own. It's
mm.
one of those unusual books. So
Yeah,
it's not your typical self-help slop.
yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, as people would have seen, I don't actually read many modern works, but I can't even remember why I bought this one. But yeah, as I described it previously when we went over Balthazar Gracian as a commentary on Balthazar Gracian, because he includes, I believe he includes, well, he includes loads of quotes, but I believe right at the start of each chapter, he includes a quotation from many authors, and I believe most of them are actually from that author, Balthazar Gracian. The Green includes at the start of his chapters. But yeah, really interesting, really in-depth commentary on a lot of topics that Gratian studies and discusses. Excuse me. Yeah, if I can very easily see how most self-help books would be completely unlike this. So yeah, I'd echo. If anyone wants to read it, or even just get a flavor for Gratian, definitely get a copy of this. Very interesting to read, and yeah, definitely does hold up. That untitled book is the Morals or Sayings of Publilius Silas, who was an ancient Roman slave. So this is just a short volume collecting all of his maxims or epigrams that he wrote. Some really interesting ethical topics he touches on. So I'd highly recommend him. That's Publilius Cyrus, or Publius Cyrus, as he's alternatively known. Then we have another modern book here, The Powerful Purpose of Introverts. So I read this, I bought and read this shortly after I bought and read the books we'll discuss shortly on A Highly Sensitive Person. I don't think I rated this one too highly, but yeah, as the title suggests, it discusses introverts and introversion in the modern day. There's another book, I don't think I have it here, but it's called Quiet. I think it's called, the subtitle is The Power of Introverts, something like that. But I read that one before this one. That's a really, really good work on introverts and introversion for anyone interested.
Yeah, I this is one of those things that I'm kind of skeptical of the more that I've learned about Myers-Briggs because
Mm,
that's where introversion, extroversion comes
yeah.
from.
Mm,
And I I think that there's potentially something a little bit pernicious about how there's more and more of books that are sort of apologies for introverts. And
mm,
I think that the social media isolation that we're seeing more
mm,
and more of that's really destroying society is sort of justified by these books and people identifying as introverts where, okay, well, it's okay that I'm never leaving my home and I'm just door dashing and Netflixing my life away. Um, these sort of normalize that. And, and so there's plenty of societies where people live in community and they're not, and most of human history, if you go back to our sort of evolutionary environment. So I think there's, uh, that book, Weird, Western, Educated, Industrialized, something, something.
mm,
That's a really important book for kind of realizing how odd and different and weird we Westerners are and first worlders are in
mm,
terms of how the rest of the world lives and even how our recent ancestors lived before
mm,
agriculture and industrialization. So even though I think, it's good to sort of know your quote unquote personality
yeah.
and all that. I
Yeah.
think you can take it too far, and I'm even
Yeah.
skeptical that there is such a thing as a fixed, you know,
Mm,
it is basically a religious belief that introversion and extroversion even exist. So I just want to put a little bit of skepticism on that because
mm,
I think it does feed into this this really dangerous pattern we're seeing of people just holding up ever since
Mm.
COVID and not, and all these community things kind of falling by the wayside.
Mm. Yeah, I have a couple of things to say. Just one that, yeah, I completely echo you. I mean, I think these are definitely useful, and this is why I bought these books to learn more about my personality, because I would self-identify definitely as an introvert. However, maybe even you or other people watching this would highly disagree with that, because I can talk hours and hours and hours and for days even on end about specific topics, and I really enjoy doing that. Sometimes more than just being alone. But I also like talking with people. It just has to be a specific kind of people. I think that the thing with introverts, and then the reason why there's a kind of tendency to for introverts to see themselves as kind of different or isolated or in their own unique category. Excuse me, is because I think the modern world, especially, is so geared towards extroverts, and it highly rewards extroversion. Let's say, for even just to give one example, we touched on previously job interviews. Right, if you're an introvert who's typically, and again, I don't agree with all of these characterizations, but the typical image of an introvert is this really shy person who just doesn't like to leave the house, as you said, right? Maybe doesn't even like talking. Everything needs to be quiet. They don't want to interact. Maybe they're even socially awkward. And if you take someone like that and a characteristic extrovert who's very loud and gets on with people really easily and is happy to talk, those extroverts are going to do much better in a job interview than introverts. So I think that's kind of where some of this stuff can stem from. At least that's my take. But yeah, I completely agree with you that, people should definitely be reading this sort of stuff to understand themselves more, as opposed to see it as an apology, as you put it, very aptly, and to kind of, continue and go even further or dig a deeper hole of, social isolation and um, being alone. So yeah, highly agree with that. And another thing as well is related is I think Stoicism can have a tendency to go to an extreme as well. Because, what's the kind of the central tenets of Stoicism? Possibly even the central one is, figure out what's under your control, where you have the power to change in your own life and your own surroundings, and anything that's not under your control, just leave it because you can't affect it in any way, right? So no use worrying about it. But if you take that to an extreme, then you can kind of just end up doing nothing, right, and completely shift the onus and um, ability that you have to direct your own life onto the external. Because I could just say, okay, well, I don't know if I'm going to get fired tomorrow when I go back to work. So let's not even bother working. Or, I'm never going to find a partner. Let's just not even bother going on dating apps or doing the work that I need to do to put myself in situations to find someone. So I think it's really important actually to tag on to stoicism. Don't go too far in it, because there is that tendency that you can have. Just take it too far and completely shift responsibility on you and your own life onto the external. Especially these days as well. I do see that quite a lot, especially with men and the masculine side of the internet. You see, these stoic texts and stoics recommended, Marcus Aurelius, all this stuff. But you do have a strong purpose and ability to change things in your own life. So don't just say, okay, I can't do anything. That's it. I think that's a very
Yeah.
bad thing to do.
There's a really interesting term that I like, which is called quietism or political quietism. And
Mm,
what I think is interesting about it is that it it captures this phenomenon where certain belief systems or certain things like stoicism, for example, cause
mm,
you to become uninvolved politically.
mm,
And when there's
yeah.
these political solutions where you exit society,
Mm,
you're not participating in the community and in politics.
yeah.
And so
Yeah.
those kind of um, whenever somebody presents an ideology or a solution to you that is fundamentally politically quietist, that whether intentional or not, they're sort of pushing you outside of the game.
Mm,
They're sort
yeah.
of convincing you not to vote, not to participate. And there's these, it's kind of like with personality where there's certain feedback loops where
Yeah.
the people who sort of should be voting the most are the least likely to vote.
Yeah.
And then that
Yeah.
creates a self-reinforcing cycle.
Mm,
One of my issues with the introversion thing is you start labeling yourself as this and you think it's this permanent
yeah. Mm, yeah. 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 Yeah.
thing. And then you behave, uh, in alignment with that for the rest of your life, and it creates a self-reinforcing loop where you start to
Yeah.
believe that. And like Malcolm Gladwell had some great stuff about like hockey players, where if their birthday is right before, right after the cutoff date, and they tend to be a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, a little bit taller, and they're in the same age bracket for their sports, they tend to show up in the pros at a much higher rate just because of that small initial advantage. So these initial conditions end up having profound effects on what people end up doing. And so if you label yourself a certain way, that can cause you to like create a rule for yourself that you then follow, or an identity that you then follow. And the hypothetical I like to give people who think they're introverts or think they're intellectuals is, go back to Socrates' time when you weren't, or even before that, where it was a purely oral culture. And, and you have in the African context, the griot, Griot, who stores the knowledge, kind of like the book Elder or Eldon or something. Do you know the one I'm talking about? It's a really famous novel.
Not specifically, no, but okay.
About basically the knowledge is passed down from it's another one of these famous dystopian novels where it's like, there's one elder who keeps all the knowledge of the community, and then they pass that down to like a young person who fits this mold as like the next person who's going to hold all the knowledge in their head. And the rest of society in this novel is kept basically ignorant. And it's just that one person who keeps the knowledge generation to generation. And so basically, if you imagine yourself as an intellectual, as an ideas person, or as a learner in a society that's purely an oral culture, then to participate, you have to be almost like one of the most active talkers. You think about Socrates and his dialogues, and like, if you were living at that time and you wanted to be a book person or a thinker, you had to be in constant conversation and part of a group, and like constantly arguing and debating and questioning and hanging out together in the town square every day. And that's such an opposite lifestyle to what you would do today to participate in the world of ideas, that you might think it makes you really question, well, if I was living back then and I had to be constantly in the town square and talking and hanging out, would I really be this shy, introverted, socially uncoordinated person, or would I actually be the exact opposite personality of what I currently am? And so thinking about that really made me question, how real are these personalities, and to what, what's more innate? Is it your personality as an introvert, or is it your curiosity as a lifelong learner?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I want to mention. Yeah, labels again. Yeah, I'll just echo your sentence about labeling and self-labeling. Yeah, just avoid that. I agree with you completely on that. Definitely don't pigeonhole yourself into anything. Whether it's introversion or extroversion or anything else. And another thing you mentioned talking. I think I read the quote previously at some point in our previous session, but actually I'll read a passage shortly. There's another passage. Sorry, not passage. Montaigne. Many people, when they read Montaigne, they feel the sensation of having a conversation with him, right? That's what it's like, almost the experience of reading him. And that's my type of books. That's what I like the most, where you feel like you're almost sat across from the person you're reading and you're talking with them. Montaigne is a great example. Like Robert Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy, great example. All the footnotes in Richard Burton's 1001 Nights is like that. That's why I love the 1001 Nights, and his edition especially. One reason anyway. Many other people as well. It's this sensational, it doesn't have to be serious, it can be conversational in tone. That's why I really like essays as well, right? So that large section I had in the main book is on essays and essayistic works. I was trying to capture or see if there's any other works that were like Montaigne in that respect, or it was almost conversational in tone and they're flitting from topic to topic sometimes within the same essay. But yeah, I agree with you completely, and it's interesting you say that because, yeah, like I said, it's when you read books, it's almost like you're having a conversation with someone. You're reading a really good nonfiction book. It can be like that. Yeah, very interesting that you say that about having to be very talkative in the oral culture that was alive back then in the ancient times. Yeah. I think that's why people really enjoy podcasts as well, right? Because it's almost the verbal or oral equivalent of reading a book. People are discussing, especially the more popular ones anyway. People are discussing ideas. They're just talking and having a conversation. I'm sure if you put into words or excuse me on a page, a single podcast where they're talking about ideas, it will probably read very much like an essay in Montaigne or Robert Burton, where they're diverting and taking loads of digressions and flitting from topic to topic.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you want to move along to this next book here?
Yes, that's Zunzi, I believe. Okay, I'm not going to be sure now. A Japanese philosopher, I believe. Just something to point out with this edition, this is not a genuinely bound Japanese style book, which I was misled by the cover art on Amazon by a while ago. So this is the paperback copy, but the hardback by, I think, Princeton University Press. Just for anyone interested, it is not traditionally hand-bound in the Japanese style. It's just a cover illustration. Yeah, interesting philosophical work by Zunzi. Then moving along, we have an interesting series of essays on the show HBO Romm. So this is a 2-volume set. I only have the first volume here, but there's an additional volume of essays. So this is on the first season of Romm, and there's an additional volume of essays on the second season. Really interesting for anyone who enjoys the show. We have another untitled volume on the spine. So this is The Caesars by Thomas de Quincey, that English author we met previously. There's an interesting kind of history on, as the title suggests, the Caesars in 6 chapters by Thomas de Quincey. We have a couple of works on art or aesthetics or beauty. We have Lee, so I believe that's Vernon Lee's The Beautiful, which I believe is a philosophical and essayistic work on beauty. Then we have an interesting work by Firenzuola, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, on the beauty of women. An interesting read on feminine beauty specifically.
Do you know roughly the year for that?
I was just going to look it up. Let me see if I believe it. Yeah, maybe a few hundred years ago. Let me quickly look it up. Firenzuola. So he was, no, it's not a commune or municipality in the metropolitan city of Florence. Firenzuola, author, beauty, women. Let's see. So he was writing 1548. Yeah, so it is a Renaissance text from 500 years ago.
I've never seen this publisher before.
Firenzuola. UPP. I can grab that shortly and we can have a look. Yeah, I'm not too sure off the top of my head of that publisher though. Yeah, I'll have to have a look. Then we have another tie into the show, Lost. Lost in Hypertext. So that's an interesting one I'm looking forward to reading. Again, as it suggests, kind of focused or centered on the literary aspect of the TV show Lost. Carrie Lynn Vaughan is the author on that one. And then we have primary ancient Roman history. Dionysius, maybe that's a Greek author, but the topic he's writing about is Roman history. So Dionysius of Halicarnassus is the author, and he wrote a history of Rome called Roman Antiquities, is it called? The Roman Antiquities, yeah, or Antiquities of Rome. This is just a very cheap print by Amazon copy. Interesting fact about that. So that's the first kind of print on demand or cheap reprint paperback book I got. And I really remember strongly, very vividly, the smell of dried noodles or dried ramen packet. That's what the book smelled of. Even when I opened the packet, I wasn't giving it a proper sniff, but as soon as I opened the packet on that, it kind of smelled of the dried ramen noodles you get. People can let us know if they've had a similar experience with Amazon print on demand.
I mean, I really don't like the smell of a lot of the glossy, big photo books.
Okay.
It's just very strong chemical smell. And I think I remember that with like the great, what is it called? The Great Travel, the sort of Travel of Europe book you have.
Oh, the Grand Tour.
Yeah, the Grand Tour. I remember that one having quite a strong smell, and it was kind of annoying.
Right. Yeah, then we have, so this one's really interesting. It's by Li Yu, or it's attributed to a Chinese author, Li Yu, called The Carnal Prayer Mat. This was written in 1657, so going back 400 or
Wow.
500 years ago. Yeah, and it's an alternative title is The Before Midnight Scholar. So yeah, this is, as I mentioned, Chinese erotic novel. Actually, if we jump to the art shots, Timothy,
Yeah.
so we see here, this is the I believe the first page of the book, how it opens. So he's saying here, let me just read a bit of this. I think it's interesting. Gentle readers, you must on no account misconstrue the intentions of this. Excuse me, you must on no account misconstrue these intentions of his. I believe he's talking about himself. Storyteller, since you want people to suppress their lecherous desires, why not write a tract to promote morality? Why write a romantic novel instead? And then I'll let people read the rest or pause to read the rest of this. But you can see just from that opening title or question, he's kind of asking himself, if you're promoting good morals, why are you writing an erotic novel? All right, let me read that passage there. People these days are reluctant to read the canonical texts, but they love fiction. Not all fiction, mind you, for they're sick of exemplary themes and far prefer the obscene and the fantastic. How low contemporary morals have sunk. So he's writing that 400 or 500 years ago, and it's amusing to contrast that with today. But you see there, even then, he's having this, or he's saying there's this issue of people not reading these high and grand philosophical texts, but they're instead just choosing to read, kind of the two penny trash novels or relatively similar rubbish. Yeah, interesting how he opens this, erotic work with these passages here.
And Freud talks about defense mechanisms and sublimation, and that's a key concept that connects with this sort of controlling of floods as the passions. And Freud was, and there's a whole intellectual history of the metaphors we use for the mind, but he was in that in early industrial era where hydraulics and hydraulic fluids was a major component of like the steam engine and other stuff. So that the water metaphors were big in that era.
Let's just read that since you're still here. The bottom part. A far better solution is to captivate your readers with erotic material and then wait for some moment of absorbing interest before suddenly dropping in an admonitory remark or two to make them grow fearful and sigh. So yeah, I'm just remembering reading this now. He has this kind of, it is a Chinese erotic novel, it's an erotic novel, but he does have this kind of penetrating philosophical observations, if you'll pardon the pun, and kind of moralistic tone he touches on throughout the book. So a very interesting early example of an erotic work. And we have a modern book here by Sir Roger Scruton called Sexual Desire. I think the full title is A Philosophical Investigation or Analysis into Sexual Desire. Pretty interesting philosophical take on the immortal subject, let's say. We have a couple of books here by Dr. Elaine Aron, called The Highly Sensitive Person and the Highly Sensitive Person in Love. So I want to take some time out to discuss these. So the sensitivity she's talking about here is sensory processing sensitivity. So this is characterized by a more sensitive central nervous system response and a deeper cognitive processing of physical, social, and emotional stimuli. And people with this are more easily stimulated or overstimulated, by external stimuli, and that's because of a lower perceptual threshold. And they process stimuli cognitively deeper than other people. So this is a physiological difference that's present in around 15 to 20% of not just humans but mammals also, I believe. And it was really Dr. Elaine Aron in the mid-90s who pioneered the research into this field and kind of gave it some academic emphasis and kind of spawned it into being really as a field of study. So I bought this because I was interested in the title because I thought it may apply to myself, which I learned it did. So for anyone who's think maybe physiologically sensitive, or as this describes, a highly sensitive person. Again, this isn't to do with, kind of sensitive to words. So, if you say I've got a crooked nose or whatever, I'll say, okay, well, that's actually, while we're on the topic of insults, there's an amusing passage from Seneca, which I'd really like to call attention to. He says about insults, he says, why do you care? Because either the insult's true, in which case, why do you care? It's true, or it's false, in which case, why do you care? Because it's false. So, I kind of tell people you can say anything you like about me. If I have a crooked nose, well, I do slightly, so there's no point worrying about it because it's true. So, and if you said I had a straight nose, well, that's not true. So why would I be bothered about that? But yeah, to return to this subject, this isn't about kind of, being sensitive to insults or attacks or language or things like that. It's talking about the physiological sensitivity of the central nervous system. So yeah, I'd recommend this to anyone who thinks they may be a highly sensitive person, or if you're dating or as a partner to a highly sensitive person. Both of these books are really, really good. Some really useful information in there. And there's a little quiz, I think, at the start of both of the books where she kind of provides a framework, and because this is a rolling scale as well, it's not like either a highly sensitive person or not. There's levels to this. Yeah, I've looked into this on Reddit and elsewhere as well, and it seems other people seem to have this in a really debilitating, or to a really debilitating extent, where it really affects their lives. And that's really terrible to hear. Obviously, if the physiological effects of this are that sensitive. Luckily, I'm not so that myself. I've got more of the good aspects of this sensitivity rather than the bad. But yeah, this you can incorporate this into your personality, and yeah, just two really good books to read on the subject. And there's something else as well, tangentially related, is we can put this in the resources, maybe Timothy, but a really great site is called Eggshell Therapy. And this is run by a lady called Imi Lo. So that's IMI space LO. So she's an internationally published author and consultant specializing in emotional intensity and high sensitivity. So it's a really, really great set of essays she has on both high sensitivity and being an intense person or having an intense personality, which also applies to myself a little as well. But yeah, really interesting to read and a really great resource. I think she also has a series of essays on borderline personality disorder, which can be interesting for those people or with an interest in that topic for people. So yeah, that's those two books. And then we just have a volume called The Nine-Chambered Heart by Janice Parriat. I bought this because of a friend who was looking to be a doctor. So I believe this is an account of this author, I believe, Janice Parriat, or I may be confusing this with another one. I don't want to get it wrong. No, sorry, this isn't the doctoral related one. That's another one. Excuse me. This is a fiction. It's a series of short stories, I believe. This one, who follows, or it's an interwoven series of short stories where there's recurring characters and things like this, or it follows a single person over a period of time.
Did you find the highly sensitive person thing to be pretty academically rigorous or scientific, or is it something else?
In terms of the book specifically, yeah, I believe they're more of an academic tone. So I did mention this Dr. Elaine Aron, who's authored these two books. She kind of pioneered and kind of broke open this field as a serious academic field of study. So it's really
Like
due to
Jung
her
was an
work.
academic, but he wasn't scientific at all. So I mean more in
Okay.
terms of, does it have a scientific
Yeah,
feel
yes,
to it?
definitely.
It
Yeah.
does. Okay.
Yeah, it definitely does. Yeah, yeah. People can look into this. There's lots of literature produced on this topic as well. Yeah. I don't know how in depth or scientific the books are here, because I think they're more geared towards providing advice and information. So I think if you want a more scientific take, then definitely look her up and her papers, because there's definitely a large field of literature that she's pioneered.
There's sort of a pattern that's made me more skeptical of, even though this does look legit and really interesting. I'm sure I'm going to learn some interesting stuff from these books. There's basically a pattern in personality studies, and this happened with grit, for example. Grit was one of the most recent, where somebody comes up with a new phrase like highly sensitive or grit, and then once they study it and measure it along with measures of the Big Five and the various facets of the Big Five, they usually discover that it's just a rehash of some part of, or some combination of stuff that's in the Big Five. So that's kind of my first thought anytime I hear something new, because it's almost become basically like a known scam within psychology.
Yeah.
Along with the whole replication crisis, where but all that said, I do think it's very interesting, and I think a lot of, you read the biographies of a lot of geniuses, and they have this element of sensitivity. So I definitely think there's something there, and even if it is a rehash, rehashes sometimes do reveal new, interesting combinations of stuff within the Big Five. So
Mm.
even if it was that, that doesn't mean that it's useless. So
Mm.
I don't want to pass judgment on it without actually looking at it, but that's just
Yeah.
for people that aren't steeped in the literature and sort of history of psychometrics and these various psychological theories, you wouldn't necessarily know that that's sort of the track record they have.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. Just to finish off on no, it is a as I mentioned, it is a physiological difference. So we're not just talking about the brain and personality here. We are talking about a real biological, physiological difference. And since you just mentioned authors, yeah, one last thing I wanted to mention is reading Proust. I would personally think that Proust was a highly sensitive person or had this physiological difference. Yeah, some of the passages in him I really identify with the level of sensitivity and romanticism in Proust that he just gives to everyday situations. Like, there's a really memorable passage where the author or the protagonist is just sitting in a room reading a newspaper, and then he looks up at this lady, this milkmaid, and she takes her hat off and her hair falls down. And there's this beautiful passage where I'll try and recall it from memory. My eyes flowed to those fluorescent frizzy locks, and I was caught in my heart and swept away by the lightning and the blasts of a hurricane of beauty. Something like that. But he's just talking about what's really going on. This woman's taken a cap off, her hair's fallen down, but the protagonist is looking up, zooming in on this hair. I can almost see it visually myself and going in depth to this, just the lightning and the blasts of a hurricane of beauty to describe some hair falling down after a woman's taken up her cap. I think it's a really beautiful example of intense romanticizing of a mundane subject.
So just in terms of the concept itself, one thing that came to mind is what is the opposite? I always like to think of okay, what's the opposite of this? And what does a book exist on that? So is there something, is there a book on the highly insensitive person and is that insensitivity a good thing? So is it value neutral, whether you're sensitive or not? Because I often get with going back to the introvert book, it's sort of it's actually better to be an introvert and you're actually kind of better than the extroverts. So I was thinking is the opposite of highly sensitive somebody who's just ignorant and insensitive or not?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is a psychopath, because they would be extremely physiologically insensitive, right? I mean, if we're talking about clinical psychopathy, these people can kill people without any physiological, even raising their blood pressure, right? Whereas if you took a highly sensitive person, again, there's various aspects which she goes into, but someone would kind of fall into the ground in shock at being asked to do something like that, or even the thought of it. So yeah, it's kind of, again, it's based on
the Stanley Milgram experiments that call that into question, where if an authority figure tells you, shock this person, I'm a doctor, it's what you should do. Most people will do that. I mean, they may suffer, PTSD or something afterwards, but they will do it. So people don't necessarily know themselves in terms of what they're capable of.
This is what I was honing in on, the physiological aspect as well, though, right? Because I'm sure if you measured heartbeats on those two sets of people, the psychopath's heartbeat probably wouldn't raise at all, whereas a sensitive person, maybe you could even tie into introverts, their heartbeat would probably be going haywire.
Well, what I was going to ask you is these experiences the Navy SEALs Hell Week or military training that intentionally tries to toughen people up and maybe make them insensitive or less sensitive than they used to be. I'm curious if that's what the meaning of sensitive is, or is there a sense in which, if you lift weights, you develop calluses on your hands.
Yes.
And there's a sense in which you're losing sensitivity, but can somebody have toughness without losing sensitivity, or are those in tension fundamentally?
No, the toughness or more personality related things isn't to do with the central nervous system response. So let's say, I mentioned I would categorize myself as a highly sensitive person in some respects, right? So I'm going to demonstrate this very easily. If I went to a restaurant, many restaurants these days, to my nuisance anyway, have really loud music, right? So if I go into a restaurant that has really loud music, which many do, my nervous system like kind of kicks off, and I can't really turn it off. Maybe after a period of time, it will kind of settle down. But if you contrast that with if I walked into a really nice, posh or fancy restaurant where there's low-level classical music playing or no music at all, I feel very much at peace and much more calmer with myself. But I can overcome that as well. And this is where the levels comes into play. So, there's some people that I've read online, really sadly, it seems that, no matter what they do, they can't overcome that physiological nervous system response. Whereas others like me, I would say I can push myself through it, or, if I need to do something, then I can. But yeah, it's interesting to read. I highly recommend looking into it, if not these books,
Yeah.
and have a look
it's definitely on
online
my
at the literature,
TBR list.
Yeah, so that rounds off this shelf, and we have, I think, just 2 more, don't we? So yeah, here we have a small collection of Everyman's Library books. So we have here Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, very famous early English novel.
Would you link this
we
to
have
Lost at all?
Yeah, you could. Yeah, that's a good point. I've never really thought about that. Yeah, for sure, you could see that as an inspiration for the show Lost. Yeah, especially with the the famous seeing of the foot that Crusoe sees could be tied in or paralleled with the monster in Lost.
To
I'll have
be
to look
honest,
into
I'm
that,
a little
actually.
bit
Yeah, I'm gonna.
surprised. I was a little bit surprised when you first mentioned you were really into Lost, because it just doesn't. I
Mm,
always saw it as like a fairly, like with The Wire, there's
mm,
a lot of people say like, yeah, that's one of the most, and Mad Men as well. It's like one of the most kind of serious TV show, but Lost doesn't have that reputation as much. So when I saw this, I thought, oh, maybe that kind of is what inspired you. But I'm curious, like, do you think about that? Like, Lost isn't really at the same level of a Mad Men or a
Oh yeah,
The
I
Wire.
have a whole theory on TV shows. Yeah, because I don't really watch movies. I just watch the same TV shows over and over again.
Hmm.
So there's what I call the Holy Trinity, which, okay, let's not put a religious context into this. The highest, well, let's just call it the Holy Trinity. It's it kind of symbolizes the peak or apex of
Yeah,
something, right?
yeah.
I'm not using it in a religious context. So The Wire is at the top, and then just below we have Mad Men and The Sopranos. Those 3 are the greatest shows that have been made. And then lower to that, we have other shows like Boardwalk Empire. Of course, I'm forgetting right now when I'm put on the spot, but we'll see later some of the lesser shows. But yeah, there's definitely a hierarchy that I
Oh
have,
yeah.
with The Wire being at the top, and then Mad Men and Sopranos slightly lower. But then yeah, Lost is a bit lower order
And
than
do you
that,
ever
but it's
watch like
still.
really trashy reality TV, or is Lost the lowest you go?
No, there's a few I've watched that you could place lower to that.
Jersey Shore or
Actually,
whatever.
just
Okay.
related to the Enneagram, which we discussed slightly
Yeah.
previously, the show House MD.
Oh
I
yeah,
hope I'm
that's
going to
another
get
one.
this right now, but I think House MD is a brilliant, possibly the best depiction ever of a type 4 on the Enneagram scale, and an extremely high functioning type 4, because you can have high functioning and low functioning. It's kind of a scale 1 to 10 that the authors go into. But yeah, if you're interested in what type 4 looks like, or you're a type 4 yourself, I think you'll really enjoy the show House MD. But yeah, again, that's not a great show, or one of the greats, but really good and amusing. Yeah, we'll
Which
touch on
one?
TV shows a bit later. Yeah, then we have John Donne, a selection of his complete English poems, as you see here, and also the complete English poems of John Milton. So you see here, I believe Everyman's Library do a small collection of different poets and their complete works. So if you're interested in buying a nice physical copy of the complete poems of an author, to definitely take a look at Everyman's Library. Then we have Augustine's Confessions, obviously the precursor to Rousseau's Confessions. Really interesting. Possibly the first, or first commonly cited example of an autobiography. Yeah, really interesting read from Saint Augustine. Funny fact: before I ever knew how Augustine was pronounced, I thought this was a female Saint Augustine. So
This
curious if anyone
actually
else
came
thought
up
that.
in the Jason Johnston. It's
Oh, really?
probably in part 1, or definitely part 1
Mm.
or part 2, because I was saying it Augustine and he was saying
Oh,
Augustine.
really?
I said, hey,
Mm.
I'll say it the way you're saying it, but I'm just curious, like, why are we
Mm.
saying it differently? And he said, well, Augustine, I was like, it was almost like, what does it say about you if you say it one way or the other? And he was like, if you say it
Mm.
Augustine, that means that you're more sort of steeped in the
Yeah.
ancient kind of scholarly study of ancient works and more historical stuff, and Augustine is more if you're sort of more of a modern person. So I thought that was interesting. And yeah, he says the same way you do. So
yeah, and the last of this little Everyone's Library collection is another one of Balzac's human comedy series, Old Goriot. I think that's pronounced. So then we sandwich between this and Freud. We have a couple more books on sexuality. This first one is called Female Sex Perversion, and it's by a guy called Chidekel. So that's, just look here, Maurice Chidekel. So MauriceChidekel, MD. So he's a doctor. The full title of this is Female Sex Perversion, the Sexually Aberrated Woman as She Is. So this is discussing lesbianism specifically, which he's calling female sex perversion. So this was written 1935. So almost 100 years ago. Interesting, kind of half serious, half amusing look at lesbianism, because there's many amusing anecdotes, some of which I think are completely untrue. So I don't know how true to life this is. So I think there's definitely some fictional aspects of this, but yeah, just an interesting historical perspective on same-sex female relationships and sexuality.
is it more psychological or sociological or patients that he's seen? Like, what's the organization of it?
Yeah, I think it's more psychological, and I do believe it includes some examples from his own patients as well, I believe. Yeah, definitely more psychological in nature. Yeah.
So was he a psychiatrist?
I'm not too sure,
Okay.
actually. Yeah. So I think he may have been, yeah, since it's his patients. Yeah, that's probably correct.
Okay. And then the next one here.
Yeah, so that one is called, see here, I'll read the full titles. This is Sane-Sex Life and Sane-Sex Living, Some Things That All Sane People Ought to Know About Sex Nature and Sex Functioning, Its Place in the Economy of Life, Its Proper Training and Righteous Exercise. This is by a guy called H.W. Long, MD. This one was published in 1919. Yeah, kind of an amusing full title there, but some of the chapters in this, the correct mental attitude, the sex organs, the act of coitus, the first union, the art of love, coitus reservatus, cleanliness, pregnancy, and then we have a conclusion.
Do you have the contents of the previous book?
Yes, I do. Shall I read some
Yeah.
other chapters from that one? What's the next one? Sorry, go back here. So, female sex perversion. Let's see some of the chapters here. Female sex perversion through the ages, the genesis of sexual perversion, the Oedipus complex in the female, the castration fear, fear and defense, traumatized sexual instincts, battles to suppress abnormal cravings, explaining the inexplicable. There's quite a lot of chapters in this, relatively short. Sadism and masochism. And a homosexual woman be cured. See, I think that's just something to touch on. I do think that Chidekel in this book is seeing homosexuality as something to be cured. So just a note to anyone looking to pick this up. Fellatio, narcissism, transvestism, frigidity and nymphomania. So, a wide range of subjects he's talking about, not strictly related to female homosexuality, but yeah. Again, like I said, I think there's some very amusing, humorous passages in there, but yeah, that's kind of his perspective that I think is good to know for people looking to.
Yeah, it sounds like it gives a pretty broad survey of what the thinking was like at the time.
Yeah, definitely. Again, just really interesting. I'm sure there's lots of other topics that I should look into. But yeah, like as we talked about previously, seeing what people 50, 100, 150 years ago thought about sex, sexuality, and within and without a marriage context is really interesting to read.
And I mean, I would say even people today and men today still have a pretty weak understanding of a lot of these elements. So it's not that we've really come so far in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. Then we have a collection of Freud's works from Penguin Modern Classics. So we got here Psychology of Love. I don't think these are formal names. Some are, some aren't. I think some of these titles that Penguin have given are just to, collect a series of lectures or essays under a single subject. But yeah, we have a wide range of Freud's works here. Most of his major ones. I have a short, humorous little book called The Complete Thunks Book. So I think this is just a few hundred small thoughts to prompt some more thinking. You can kind of bring this out during a family get together and use it as a kind of board game or something like this. Just a series of very brief, amusing thoughts or questions on lots of subjects. So I think that rounds off that shelf, the penultimate one, and then we get to the final one of the main series of books. So what do we have on the very last shelf in my bedroom? So let's go top to bottom. We'll skip Machiavelli and we'll end with him. So just above that, we have another volume of Proust's works on art and literature. So this is a collection of non-fiction kind of essays, I believe, that Proust wrote on art and literature, as the title suggests. Again, really interesting to read, especially if you enjoyed Proust's work or some of his fiction.
What would you say is, how would you describe Proust to somebody who's never read him?
I'm going to steal a description that's from the In Our Time podcast episode on Proust that we mentioned before with the Tale of Sinuhe. The way this lady academic was describing it, I can't remember her name. The way she was describing it is reading Proust is like jumping into a big pool and just being surrounded by this liquid, beautifully described language and metaphors and beauty. I think that's. I did mention with this novel, I already talked about it being described into kind of three: a third of it's plot, a third of it's just poetry and prose, and then another third is kind of his philosophical and psychological observations. So that's really what it's like reading him. But yeah, just beautiful passages. He's really known, actually, I almost forgot. Proust is known for his incredibly long sentences. So I'm remembering from the podcast, the academic who's talking, she says that when her husband asks her to do the dishes, she says, yeah, she'll get up from the sofa and do it after she's finished reading this Proust sentence, which, unbeknownst to her husband, can take half an hour or something like this. Yeah, he has some very, very long sentences. I think 900 words or something like that is the longest in his novel In Search of Lost Time. But yeah, just beautiful language, rich in metaphor, highly romantic in nature and
So I just Googled, I wanted to see if I could pull up something. Then this is the first Reddit thing that came up. Without further ado, my favorite 4 sentences yet, page 140 to 141 of Penguin's Lydia Davis translation. It's just about a paragraph here. The light fell so implacably from the still sky that one would have wanted to elude its attention, and the dormant water itself, whose sleep was perpetually irritated by insects dreaming no doubt of some imaginary maelstrom, increased the disturbance into which I had been plunged by the sight of the cork float, by appearing to draw it at a full speed over the silent reaches of the reflected sky. Almost vertical, it seemed about to dive, and I was already wondering if, quite beyond my desire to know her and my fear of knowing her, I did not have a duty to warn Mademoiselle Swan that the fish was biting when I had run to rejoin my father and grandfather, who were calling me, surprised that I had not followed them along the little lane they had already entered, which leads up to the fields. I found it all humming with the smell of hawthorns. The hedge formed a series of chapels that disappeared under the litter of their flowers. Heaped into wayside altars, below them the sun was laying down a grid of brightness on the ground as if it had just passed through the stained glass window. Their perfume spread as unctuous, as delimited in its form as if I were standing before the altar of the Virgin. And the flowers themselves adorned also, each held out with a distracted air, its sparkling bunches of stamens, delicate radiating ribs in the flamboyant style like those which, in the church, perforated the balustrade of the rude screen of the mullions of the window, and blossomed out into the white flesh of a strawberry flower. How naive and folksy by comparison would seem the sweetbriars which, in a few weeks, would climb in a full sun the same country lane in the smooth silk of their blushing bodices, undone by a breath.
There's lots of floral imagery there. He mentions hawthorns a lot. I remember you said that. But yeah, you see, he just goes on and on, kind of extending this romantic, beautiful imagery that he's talking about. I can read one of my favorite passages if you
Yeah,
like.
definitely.
It's a brief one. So this is a lesser known one. It's not from In Search of Lost Time. This is from, let's see here, Contrast and Bove. So this is in one of the essays in that volume we looked at on art and literature. So he's, people can get the context and I'll provide some additional after I finish. So he says here, but this was not all that I would have liked to see again. The train halted there, and as I stood at the window where a smell, the train halted there, and as I stood at the window where a smell of coal smoke came in, a girl, tall and rosy-cheeked, walked by with steaming cups of café au lait. There is no spice in the abstract love of beauty, for it imagines beauty in terms of the already known, and confronts us with a made and concluded universe. But what a pretty girl, the more has to offer, is precisely something we had not imagined. Not beauty, something in common with others, but as a person, something particular, a thing by itself, and also something individual which exists and in which we would like to mingle our life. I called out, "Coffee, please." She did not hear me. I saw this life in which I counted for nothing, her eyes that had never known me, her thoughts in which I played no part, going away from me. I called her, she heard me, she turned round, smiled, and came back. And while I was drinking my coffee and the train was about to start, I stared her full in the eyes. Hers did not flinch, staring back into mine with a look of astonishment, where, though my desire believed it saw fellow feeling, how I would have liked to purloin her existence, to take her with me on my journey, call her my own, if not her body, at least her attention, her time, her friendship, her ways. There was no time to spare, for the train was starting. I said to myself, I shall come back tomorrow, and now, 2 years after, I feel that I will go back there, that I will try to live in that neighbourhood, and early one morning, under a pink sky, and looking down on that wild ravine, kiss the apple-cheeked girl who offers me café au lait. I think that also characterizes the type of stuff he talks about as well, this really sentimental passages about women, because he's a kind of fictionalized account of himself as a child in his novel, In Search of Lost Time. So yeah, he's many passages like that talking about women and girls and beauty when he's a kid all the way up to as he grows older.
And he loves the semicolon.
He does, yes. The only method and tool he has to extend his sentences to
He's a master of
words,
the semicolon.
yeah. Yeah, beautiful language. What do we have here? One of the rare secondary works I still own, Life and Leisure in Ancient Rome. I don't think I've read that one yet, but the title should give you some indication. Then this other book we can see a peek of is called Screenshots of Broken Hymn. So this is a very short poetry collection by someone I know in real life called Aria Yang. So this is her poetry collection, which is debuted with. People can check
Did you
that
spell
out
that?
if they're interested. Yes, the author's name is Aria and then space Yang. So that's Aria Yang. And the book's called Screenshots of Broken Hymn. And then the next book is The Little Prince, a book she really likes. So that's why I bought that one. I think it's very well known, actually, that, isn't it? I think it's a children's story, I think.
Yeah,
either way, it's very well known. Then the next untitled one is the last untitled one we have. So this is Anactoria and Other Lyrical Poems by Algernon Charles Swinburne. It's a funny story with this. This is a collection of poems, but that title, Anactoria and Other Lyrical Poems, I thought that was referring to the ancient Greek poet Anacreon, who I really like, and it is included in one of the ancient Greek Loeb series of poetry. This is completely unrelated to the Greek poet Anacreon. For anyone who's interested, this is just completely unrelated poetry by the famous poet Swinburne.
would you mind spelling out the title and author? Because I think it's a little bit tough.
Yeah, sure. That's the title is Anactoria. So that's Anactoria, Anactoria. And then the author Swinburne is his last name. That's Swinburne. He's a very famous poet. So that's that one there. Then we have Petrarch's On Religious Leisure and the Poetry of Petrarch. I haven't read his On Religious Leisure yet, but his poems here. So we mentioned this right at the start, I think. So that collection of poetry is what's called his sparse poems or random poems. So the Italian is it's referred to by two names, a collection, Canonziere or Rima Sparsa. So that's Canonziere, and then the other name is Rima Sparsa, Rimesparse. But really beautiful poetry by Petrarch. Kind of Proustian in sentiment almost, I would say, in terms of the language used to describe women. Really beautiful short poems by Petrarch. Highly recommend either this edition or another edition of his minor poetry.
You don't happen to have any on hand?
I can quickly look it up in my notes if you just give me 2 seconds. Let's see, Petrarch. Let's see here, some of the nicer ones. This little bit of life restores my joy. It's all I need, and if I could let me start that again. This little bit of life restores my joy. It's all I need, and if I could sustain it, there'd be no state on earth equal to mine. Another passage, your heavenly light to which I owe my life, since nothing else affords me earthly joy. Let me search for one passage which I really like. That's the word called bind. Here we are. I mean that hair of hers, the cold blonde snare that softly ties my soul and binds it tight. Okay, it's really beautiful, rich language and imagery used to describe, I believe, the lady who was doted with Laura, Laura. So Dante had his Beatrice, who he was kind of, obsessed or intoxicated with. And then Petrarch had Laura, who he felt the same way towards, Then we have a random book, Walk in My Soul, by Lucia Sinclair Robson. I can't remember how things was included in a collection of books I bought. I think it's kind of an Indian-American, Central Indian fantasy novel, kind of, I think. Yeah, I haven't got to that one yet. Then this is the book I was confused with earlier. So this one is the one about the doctor. So this is called When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. So I believe this guy was becoming a doctor or wanted to become a doctor, but then he sadly passed away either before or shortly after he became a doctor. Really interesting view on, what it really takes to get a medical degree and, treat patients and the really hard decisions you have to make. Really interesting perceptive insight into that. I think it's very well known as well, so I highly recommend it. Then we have, I think this is the parallel to the Roman version of this book we saw just previously on the same shelf. So this is a daily life in Greece at the time of Pericles, another secondary work on ancient Greece there. Then we have another book that I know written by someone I know. So this is written by another called Veronica Barber, is what she goes by. So that's VeronicaBarber. So it's called Fatalist, is the title of the novel. Very interesting and intimate, semi-fictionalized novel here. Highly recommend that one as well. Then rounding off, we have one of the final works on sexuality I have. So this is called The Sexual Relations of Mankind by Paolo Mantegazza. So that's PaoloMantegazza. And this is an English translation. I believe he was an Italian author. This was translated into English in 1935, but I believe he wrote the work in the Italian around the early to mid 1800s. As the title suggests, it's a really interesting work. I haven't got to this one yet, but if we read some of the chapter titles in this one, The Festivals of Puberty, The Artifices of Sensual Pleasure, The Winning of the Bride, Purchase of the Wife and Marriage, The Nuptial Pact, Fidelity and Adultery, Position of the Woman in Marriage, Nuptial Rites and Feasts, Monogamy, Polygamy and Polyandry, Prostitution, The Future Possibilities of Love. So I believe what he's doing in this book is taking a really wide survey throughout the whole of the world. So lots of different cultures, lots of different time periods. Yeah, I'm just flipping through. I see Japan mentioned here, Marco Polo, Tibet. So he's going around the whole world and discussing each country or culture's sexual relations, which I think is really interesting. So Richard Burton mentions this guy and this work in particular in one of the footnotes in his supplemental lines.
Do you know the year?
Yeah, very. So yeah, I mentioned 1935 is the English translation, and then if I look this up here, Mantigance, I did have him pulled up, Paolo. So the original Italian was written in, let's see here, 1885 is when he wrote this in the original Italian.
Hmm.
So he was an Italian neurologist, physiologist, and anthropologist, known for his experimental investigation of coca leaves and its effects on the human psyche, Wikipedia's telling me here. So he was born 1831 and died in 1910. Yeah, really interesting and wide-ranging survey on sexuality. And then let's see, the last book returns to Lost once again, kind of fitting for the theme of the show. So this one's called Lost and Philosophy, Think Together, Die Alone. So this is one of a series into, I think the series is called Blackwell Philosophy. But there's many other Show X and philosophy books in this series. So I think there's another one on the comedy Curb Your Enthusiasm and philosophy in this series, published by Wiley. We see there.
There's one for Mad Men, I know that.
Oh, okay. I'll have to
probably one for Sopranos also. I mean, they do all the big TV shows that are halfway decent. So there's actually a surprisingly large number of these. It's kind of, I always wonder, like, they must be making a lot of money with these because there's just so many of them.
Yeah, I think there's one on, what's that famous, of course, I forget all the names now, don't know when I'm on the spot. What's that famous American comedy? Larry David actually produced Seinfeld. I think there's one on Seinfeld and philosophy as well. Yeah. Oh, before we forget, so let's return to the start of the first book on the shelf. Yeah, The Letters of Machiavelli. So let's end with this. So yeah, I only learned of these relatively recently. So we do have collections of Machiavelli's letters. And I want to finish the main shelves by reading a passage from here. So Machiavelli here is writing on the 10th of December, 1513. So he says here in one of his most famous letters, and one of my favorites. So he says here, on the coming of evening, I return to my house and enter my study. And at the door, I take off the day's clothing, covered with mud and dust, and put on garments regal and courtly. And reclothed appropriately, I enter the ancient courts of ancient men, where, received by them with affection, I feed on that food which is only mine, and which I was born for, and which I am not ashamed to speak with, and to ask them the reason for their actions. And they in their kindness answer me, and for 4 hours of time I do not feel boredom, I forget every trouble, I do not dread poverty, I am not frightened by death, entirely I give myself over to them. I think that's a beautiful passage, in the vein of Montaigne, talking about books and studying, and how if we carve out those 4 hours or however many hours you can of time to spend with these ancient old people, it's really worthwhile and unlike anything else. So yeah, highly recommend that collection of his letters.
So we've now gone through your final major bookcase in your bedroom here. All right, so we're jumping back in with the TV show shelves, and we've got 2 of them here. So you want to get started with the wire here?
Yeah, I don't want to spend too long on these, but this is kind of my second library, if you will. So we already touched on TV shows just previously. So yeah, we have The Wire here first, which is not just the best show that has been made, but the best show that will ever be made, is my grand statement on this. So for anyone who hasn't watched it, then please do look at this. Again, it transcends the medium of TV completely, and it enters high art and it's high tragedy in the Greek tradition specifically. Maybe we could just skip to 2 photos later, Timothy, on a little analysis that I started. So I'm taking a kind of people familiar with James Joyce's own analysis of his novel Ulysses might find some of the subtitles I've given here familiar, but yeah, I've kind of taken that as a framework to, again, this is just a start of a deeper analysis of the show. And again, I'm paralleling it with ancient Greek tragedy here. So we see I've kind of given each season a Greek tragedian's name, and then the last one ends in high comedy. That's something else to note. So the show is incredibly serious, but it's also one of the funniest shows. The humor in it is really amusing. And again, the whole show, season 4 is like the highlight or very apex of tragedy. Like I've said, they are high tragedy, sublime tragedy, off the scale tragedy. And then after you've had, the most tragic thing you can kind of experience or put on screen, season 5 ends with a bang with some really amusing comedy, which is what the whole season is. And it's why people don't kind of like that season. They think it's too unrealistic or too comedic. But yeah, just an amazing show. Highly, highly recommend it to anyone. It's much more than a police show, in case people characterize it as that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, just to quickly touch on the rest. Yeah, we have The Wire. Then next in the order, we have The Sopranos, which you mentioned. Again, great show about much more than just a mob boss and the mob. Even just the premise. You got this mobster who's going to therapy. Some of the therapy scenes in this are really interesting to see and think about. And we have Lost, which we've discussed a lot in the past 10, 20 minutes. I won't spend too much time on that, but the Blu-rays on this, the quality is amazing, just from a visual perspective, with those beautiful packaging as well. Well, very annoyingly, not the spines anyway, because they're not lining up, which is very annoying, which I'm sure we see on lots of book series as well. And then we have Mad Men, the other show in the Holy Trinity, what I call anyway, with Sopranos and The Wire. You can really dive deep on this, It's kind of deceptively simple or deceptively aesthetic looking. Because you can just view this very easily as just a nice looking show and not really pay much attention to it. But there's many people that have done analyses on each episode, and you can read each one of those people's essays on each episode, and they've found and see and discuss different things to each other. And then you yourself may even have different thoughts. So, it's kind of a deceptively deep show almost. You can really go into depth and analyze it from a literary perspective. It's a very literary show.
Hmm.
Yeah, definitely one of the greats, along with The Wire and Sopranos.
Can you think of any examples of that literary element to Mad Men?
Yeah, it's just very symbolic and metaphorical. And there's larger themes as well, like a whole season, some of the later seasons focus around a central theme. And then there's various aspects brought into that, rich symbolic imagery. Sometimes there's many literary texts within the show itself, like Gibbon's Decline and Fall is mentioned in it, or shown in it, excuse me. And there's many literary parallels in it as well. But yeah, just many literary devices that are used within the show, which I can't tell you off the top of my head because I didn't do English language, but anyone who did or is familiar with literary devices and themes will find many parallels used in the show. Yeah, brilliantly acted, beautifully shot, and a classic for sure. And let's jump to the next one. So yeah, we have HBO Rome, which we've mentioned quite frequently. Again, anyone who's interested in ancient history, I'd highly recommend this because it really brings the ancient world to life, especially ancient Rome. And then here we have that other show called Borgia, which I've mentioned. Again, not the show The Borgias. This one is just Borgia. So that's Borgia in 3 seasons here. Produced by Studio Canal or Canal Plus. Very Game of Thrones in its approach, especially in contrast to the other lesser show, The Borgias, because kind of throws you in at the deep end. There's all these families, all these names you need to keep track of. Very large in scope compared to the other show, The Borgias. So yeah, highly recommend this. A real feast for the eyes as well. Beautiful imagery. And I usually watch this every summer after I watch HBO Rome. Then we have Boardwalk Empire, another HBO classic, kind of the 1920s version of The Sopranos, if you will. Beautiful cinematography in this, and there's some really, really interesting and unusual cinematographic choices in this, and really unusually framed shots. So anyone with an interest in film, take a look at the show. You'll really have an interest from the cinematography aspects of it. And we have
I'm
House
just
of
curious,
Cards.
coming from an American
Yeah.
perspective, why are there
Mhm.
2 18s here?
Yeah, I'm not too sure actually. Maybe they're covering all the different regions. So the top one is maybe just America, and I can't remember the Blu-ray regions. It's split by letter, like region A, B, C, D, and E, I think. So these, yeah, they may just be selling this specific set in multiple regions, so they're covering all their bases. Yeah, then we have House of Cards. Really good insight into politics and I would even say if you watch this, nothing in politics today or in modernity will surprise you really. American politics, that is, with the Democrats and Republicans. Yeah, really good show. Brilliantly acted. And then is that all we've got there? I think it is, isn't it? Yeah. So yeah, there's a few other shows as well, just while we're on here. Curb Enthusiasm and Arrested Development are the holy duology of comedy, I guess you could say. They're the only comedies worth watching, in my opinion. And then we have like Claudius here as well, like we see. Anyone interested or enjoys HBO Rowan, take a look at this very old BBC show. It's very old, but yeah, very enjoyable for anyone who likes ancient Rome. Yeah, I think that's about it for TV shows.
There seems to be a very American collection. And I just thought it was interesting that there isn't like any British stuff here except for I, Claudius.
Yeah, so these are, again, so The Wire, Sopranos, Mad Men are the Holy Trinity. They're the peak of the peak. Then you got HBO Rome here and Boardwalk Empire, slightly lesser. Then all these and Borgia I'd put in the category of a really, really excellent show just below the Holy Trinity. And then House of Cards is, it's not it's not one of the best, but it's really good. Same with Lost. It's not one of the best, but really good. Same with like Claudius. There are some other ones that I've watched as well. Of course, on the spot, I'm forgetting them now. But in terms of Britishness, Blackadder is a really good comedy. Now that you mentioned British TV, that's a really good comedy. I've actually been meaning to rewatch that. Maybe I could form a holy trinity of comedy actually and add Blackadder to Curb Enthusiasm and Arrested Development. Yeah, Blackadder's a really good British one. I think that's the only British one I'd rate really highly. It's funny you say that because as a British person, I don't really find British TV that interesting. I think it's kind of goofy, actually. I don't like the way it's shot or even acted. But many people who I've spoken with who are outside Britain, so I've got a few European friends and one American or one or two American friends. Yeah, they really enjoy the British TV shows. So maybe it's a case of if you're not from here, you may enjoy them even more.
Yeah, this is a pretty superficial comment, but I'm just curious what you make of it.
Yeah, sure.
I was just reading an article that like British teens are like using American slang more and more and like more of an American accent. And they think it's because of social media that like British kids are watching American slop. I mean, Mr. Beast, whether it's Mr. Beast or Logan Paul or whatever. And so I just thought like you have like a very British accent. And so I guess I would assume like you consume a lot of British TV or movies. And so
it's
just kind of funny.
Opposite, yeah. Maybe that will change. Maybe if we do another video in 10, 20 years time, I'll be fully Americanized. We'll have to see.
All right. So that wraps up the TV here. And you don't have any movies. So it's just, you mentioned that you're...
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, just to slightly expand on that. The reason I have watched movies, obviously. The reason I don't really enjoy movies and even many novels as well is if you parallel movies with the short story format, right, or novella, and then TV shows as a multi-volume novel, let's say In Search of Lost Time or The 1001 Nights, I really like something super long that you can really immerse yourself in, and that's a long period of time. The authors really built the world up. You see character progression, not just over weeks or months or years, but over decades or sometimes even multiple lifetimes. So part of me not consuming movies is mainly because I just enjoy a longer format fictional experience, and that's what the TV shows obviously provide as opposed to movies. But I do watch the odd movie here and there. I even have The Matrix just out of shot as well, and I need to get a few of the other movies I'm fond of on them on Blu-ray as well. Now that you mention it,
what about Lord of the Rings?
I've never. Should we broach on that subject, Timothy? I'm not a fan. Okay, well, I haven't consumed. Okay, so I'm of a very strong opinion that you shouldn't judge something if you haven't consumed it, ideally in its entirety, right? So I'm not going to say Tolkien's a bad author, but I've not really got much of an interest in Lord of the Rings, and I never have. I have seen the films. I actually watched them at the cinema when they came out with my father and my brother. but I haven't read the novels. I really enjoy Game of Thrones, or the Song of Ice and Fire series, as the novels are called. But yeah, I think the fantasy element is too strong in Tolkien for me. At least that's how it seems. I may be wrong about that. But to contrast it with George R. R. Martin's The Song of Ice and Fire, um, the fantasy kind of takes a backseat and it's very heavily character and human driven. It's really focused on the human aspects and politics even, and society. Excuse me. So I think the fantasy element is just too strong in Tolkien for me. I'm not really interested in the orcs and elves and things like that.
What about
But I won't knock it.
the Batman trilogy, Christopher Nolan, and
Yeah, those are really
Interstellar?
good. Yeah. Yeah, I did see Interstellar. Yeah, the Batman trilogy is really good. I was discussing that with a friend just the other day, actually. Yeah. You're making me spend more money now. I'm going to have to update my to-buy list. Yeah, those are really good. Really enjoy those.
Christopher Nolan is working on the Odyssey, like the first,
He is,
and that's pretty crazy. I was talking to Greg about that, and it's just amazing to me that there's a lot of these really famous classic stories that have never really been adapted by anybody competent into a movie. And to imagine the Odyssey not being adapted is kind of crazy. So, and even Troy is kind of an amalgam of stuff. So, and it kind of makes sense that it's an amalgam because there's a lot of missing books there. But yeah. Okay,
I'm in two minds whether I'm going to see Homer's Odyssey. Maybe I can end with a very amusing quote. And again, I'm not being serious here. This is very tongue-in-cheek, and it's not even my words. This is from the book that the show I, Claudius is based on that we see here. So in the novel I, Claudius, there's an exchange between two characters. One of them says, Homer's the most overrated author. I'm going to have his poems called in and burned. Someone replies, is Your Sacred Majesty going to burn any other poets beside Homer? And then he says, oh, indeed, yes, all the overrated ones. Virgil for a start. He's a dull fellow. Tries to be a Homer and can't do it. And then the other guy replies, and any historians? And the original person replies, yes, Livy, still duller. Tries to be a Virgil and can't do it. Which I think is a very amusing little exchange from the book that's based on.
Okay, so we'll wrap up here with the TV and the movies, and then we'll pick back up with the remaining books and dark academia.
Yes.
All right, so we're jumping back in now with the last two photos of books, and these both relate to dark academia. So we're going to start off with a little intro on dark academia, and then into how these books relate to dark academia. So take it away.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, a dark academia is a term that many people probably will be familiar with, but in case you aren't, so this is kind of a dark academia you could describe it as an internet subcultural aesthetic or subgenre that kind of focuses on romanticizing reading, studying, or the general pursuit of knowledge. In terms of visuals around this aesthetic, you can think of Ivy League colleges in the United States or Oxford and Cambridge here in the UK. These kind of grand and noble centers of learning, lots of stone walls, dark wood panels, classical paintings. And then some of the surrounding aesthetics can include things like dark study sessions, rain and fog, leather books, candles and candlelight. And this can extend into lifestyle aspects and aesthetics as well. So if we're talking about fashion, you can think of, things along the lines of traditional uniforms here in the UK. And also New England prep styles, so, think Ralph Lauren and Drake ties in the US. And then things like collared shirts, tweed blazers, ties, turtleneck jumpers, classic leather shoes, wire and glasses. And some of the lifestyle related things that can be categorized as dark academic can include things like journaling, using fountain pens, visiting museums and classical music, and tea and coffee as well, things like this. So this kind of really took off in the mid 2010s via Tumblr. So, lots of people sharing photos of imagery of all the things we just mentioned, and it kind of really took off within the last 5 to 10 years with the rise of Instagram and TikTok. So yeah, it's kind of a whole subgenre, subculture, aesthetic, whichever one you choose to refer to it by. And if you search on even YouTube, especially Instagram and TikTok, if you just type in dark academia, dark academic, dark academia aesthetic, you'll find loads of photos and videos of the things we've talked about, and people in university libraries or libraries on their own or in their living room in a very kind of dark, gloomy, and moody, especially atmosphere, and obviously centered around books and studying and reading.
And it's
So,
sort of a echo of
mm,
the Romantic era and just Romanticism.
mm, yeah, exactly. Um, so before we jump to the text, just since we talked about films, a very central kind of film in this aesthetic is the movie Dead Poet Society, which was out in 1989. So kind of a long time ago. That's what, almost 35 years ago. But yeah, in terms of the visuals, you'll see in that movie, lots of school children, in uniforms, obviously centered around learning and studying, and some moral ambiguity and some tragedy and drama occurring as well, which people like to tie in. But yeah, so that's the kind of central film. And then if we get into the books here, so Donna Tartt's novel, The Secret History, is kind of seen or referred to as a foundational, I guess you could call it, text of dark academia. So this is a novel that centers on a guy called Richard Papin, who's a working class Californian, and he transfers to the elite Hampton College in Vermont. And then when he's there, he's drawn into this exclusive circle of students who are taught by Professor Julian Marrow, where they focus on classical Greek. And the author Donna Tartt is kind of an embodiment of dark academia in many ways. She's this kind of enigmatic and elusive figure who seems to be relatively solitary. She doesn't give many interviews and prefers to kind of stay in the dark or in the back seat until she pops out every 10 years or so with another book. And an interesting fact about her, she was actually good friends with Bret Easton Ellis, the famous author of American Psycho, of course. And they both attended Bennington College in Vermont. So they were both students there and remain good friends to this day, I believe. So yeah, I have many copies of this work, as Timothy's showing here. This is another book, recently released, Catabasis, which could also be classed under the Dark Academia title of Tartt's novels. And the way this collection started was a friend who has, sorry, excuse me, a friend has, excuse me, let me think about how to phrase this. The Secret History is a good friend's favorite novel, or one of her favorite novels. And she was talking to me about this, and she kind of introduced me to Donna Tartt. And she showed me a photo, which I think may originate on Twitter, of a really large collection of Donna Tartt's, or copies of Donna Tartt's The Secret History. I think this person had about 30 or so, including some nice signed editions. And it just looked like a really cool photo. So I actually used that as a basis to buy some of these editions. There's some rare copies, just to call attention here. There's a first UK paperback and hardcover, which Timothy's mouse cursor is on at the moment. Two below that, or to the left, we have an uncorrected or advanced proof copy, this American Knopf paperback here. And there's some random non-English versions and variants. And then in the middle, if you rotate it, Timothy, there's just like to bring attention to the two audio cassettes that I have. There's a very, well, semi-popularly or frequently seen Penguin edition, which you see with the orange on the top and the bottom. But this Random House audio cassette version, I don't think I've ever seen a non-stock photo of, so people may find that interesting. That's actually a sealed copy, which I was able to find. But I started this collection because it's not my favorite book, but I bought a couple of copies for my friend. But then I came across other copies just really cheaply, and it kind of kept going. Some of these are quite hard to find, but I managed to just find them at a really good price. So I thought I'd kind of build a small collection. So I think she'll get a kick out of this if she's watching this video. But yeah, an interesting novel. For its literary value, I'd recommend it. And especially if you're interested in dark academia, definitely pick it up because it's a foundational text.
And I wanted to
But if we
make
jump to the,
I just wanted to say
yeah,
one
please.
thing about the setup that you gave at the beginning, where it's like a professor and some students, or a bunch, or like the Dead Poet Society, like it's sort of this underground thing. And I just wanted to add a little context to that, which is that as universities have been pressured to get rid of the classics, get rid of classic literature, and adopt, even really since the Industrial Revolution. You think about Harvard and the Harvard classics. That was really Harvard was abandoning the classics as the path everybody took and moving towards the elective system, teaching STEM and business. And so that was back around 1900. So we're already 100 years plus into this. And so the abandonment of that traditional university experience that everybody did for hundreds and hundreds of years, of you need to learn your Latin and Greek before you even apply to college, and then you're reading in the original languages. That all was swept away with the Industrial Revolution. And so these sort of small outposts, these people who are keeping that tradition, or really they're not keeping it alive because so few people are actually reading in original languages and learning that stuff when they're younger. So that tradition is super, super rare. But even just reading this stuff in translation and reading it for aesthetic enjoyment and not just like, oh, I have to bang out an essay on this and then move on to the next thing. Those people are, 10%, 1% of the people who go through your average English class. And so there's no real course for them. There's no home for them. So they're sort of homeless to an extent, and they come together and they study like unofficially and keep the flame alive. And so that's part of the idea of dark academia, is that we're in sort of a dark ages where it's the reign of STEM and the reign of Silicon Valley and the industrial machine. And so it's that darkness, and then there's a small beam of light or a small candle keeping that flame alive. So that might add a little bit of texture for people who are wondering, oh, what is this? What's the through line here?
Actually, we'll just go back previously, Timothy, something which people might find interesting in the previous photo. If you zoom in on the top left there, people may be wondering what that is. That's actually at my university, which I went to, the University of Birmingham. Again, that's the UK university, not the American one. This is roughly placed in the center of the large campus we have. So this is actually, I believe, the largest freestanding clock tower in the world. If it's not so today, it was at the time of building, but I believe it still holds that title. And this actually inspired Tolkien's Eye of Sauron in his Lord of the Rings. So I believe Tolkien spent some time in Birmingham.
So is this bigger than Big Ben?
That's a good question. Is that maybe Big Ben's? I think Big Ben's not considered a freestanding clock tower
Because on the
it's
corner.
surrounding buildings. Yeah.
Okay.
But it might be a similar height. Maybe it is very, very tall.
Do you have a sense of like how many stories tall it is? It's like 10 stories.
Let's just guess some numbers so people have an exact. It's much larger than 10 stories, I believe. Let's see. So it's 110 meters high, and
it's like 30.
That.
Maybe.
What do you guys use in America? I can't even remember.
Well, it would just meters would be 3 feet, so 30 meters would be 90 feet.
So 110 meters is 360 feet. Yeah.
So 36,
110 meters.
36 floors, roughly 30 to 40 floors.
Yeah,
that's pretty legit.
About right.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it must be quite wide also.
It's not too wide. I mean, you see that it's you see that relative to the height, it's not too wide, really.
Yeah.
There's a tradition actually that students who walk under the tower as the bell is ringing are destined to fail their exams. So that's an amusing bit of trivia there for anyone interested. Yeah, just thought I'd touch on that for anyone interested. For the Tolkien connection. Yeah, it's just a little figure I have.
It's kind of funny that I wonder why they chose this time of day, because I always think of like a watch. In watch photos, it's always 10 and 2. So I wonder if there's some meaning to that.
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I'll have to look at it's the same time on all 4 sides, because I believe there's a clock on all 4 sides of the tower. Yeah, those are some copies of The Secret History, which continue here. So we see here on the left, we have some more copies, including the 25th Penguin anniversary edition, which is quite rare, that one in white. And some non-English copies we see there. I've never seen a photo of that one in real life either, that blue one. Die Geheimgeschichte. Yeah, is a possible pronunciation of the secret history in German. Yeah, just some other copies. So let's touch on this other book, which is another central text of Dark Academia. So this is called If We Were Villains by M. Al Rio is the author on this one. So this follows an individual called Oliver Marks, and he's one of 7 fourth-year acting students at the Delaware Classical Conservatory, where Shakespeare is kind of their lifeblood. So Oliver joins a series of other students, and again, there's a central plot point which I won't spoil, but people can look into. But I enjoyed this more than the secret history, actually, and this is suffused with an incredible number of quotes from Shakespeare, and it reminded me of Robert Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy in that respect, in terms of the sheer amount of relevant quotations that the author puts in here, and that's because Rio has a master's in Shakespeare studies, and she's currently doing a PhD as we speak as well. So she really knows her Shakespeare. So really interesting to read that novel from that perspective. But yeah, very kind of dark and academic in that respect. So we just see here some of the copies I have of both the secret history and I believe all the English language copies of If We Were Villains. I have the hardback just out of sight at the very bottom. And a copy of the Tart's Little Friend advanced proof as well, which is signed by her. And then I'll let people figure out that copy, which has an interesting cover. If you zoom in there on near the top right, is a kind of tangentially related book, which I've wrapped in a paper packaging to form a dust cover because I didn't like the cover, the stock cover on it. So I'll let people take a guess at what that is. It's not one of these, but it's related to some of these books. Some other things just to bring attention as well. That cassette there, the Daily Telegraph's short stories, 2nd edition. This contains a short story by Donna Tartt. So anyone interested in Donna Tartt, if you can manage to find a copy of this, it contains a short story by her called The Roman Candle, which I don't think she's published anywhere else. So that's a bit of Tartt trivia there. And then this other cassette below is True Grit, which is read by Donna Tartt in this edition. So True Grit is one of Donna Tartt's favourite novels. And I believe she's wrote the introduction of the foreword to a modern copy. But this is the cassette. Another interesting item I haven't seen any non-stock photos of. So yeah, that's a little bit about Dark Academia and these two figures, towering figures especially. So let's pivot to the kind of the final books we're going to discuss here. So let's start at the very bottom just very quickly. The very bottom volume is a really nicely bound copy of Vanity Fair. So it's in 2 volumes. I only have the first one. This is one of a very, very small number of books I bought purely because of how it looks. There's a very few number of times I've done that, but this one has a really nice spine you see there and a nice floral front and back cover. And then related to books that I bought, just because of how they look actually, this is another one. So this top one here is called Woman and the Wits by a guy called G.F. Monkshood. So you see here, it's custom bound actually in this really nice kind of dark green or almost beige suede material. And then the previous owner, you can see, has tied this really nice silk ribbon around it, which I think is a really nice touch. So this was completely done by the previous owner. There's many editions and copies you can find of this work, but as far as I know, this is a one of one, really beautifully bound. If we switch to the art shots, Timothy, the Monkshood ones. So this, again, I bought this purely because of how it looks. One of the small handful of books I've done that for. But reading it is very interesting, and as the title suggests, it's called Woman and the Wits. So it's a series of, here we have a nice shot. You see that ribbon and the suede material. Really nice bow. They've formed out of that silk ribbon. Yeah, if we scroll through a couple of the next photos, we see it's a collection of epigrams and maxims on woman and women. Yeah, this is actually really nice. Let's go back one, sorry. Even the interior, look at the end papers here. It's beautiful. I don't even know what material that is. Is it? It's kind of silk or some elaborate silver-colored cloth/silk-like material. Again, this is completely custom because this is not to be found in standard copies of this work. Yeah, again, one of the really nice surprises you can find when you buy old books. Again, none of this stuff was advertised in the listing only the bow, which is what I bought it for. But yeah, it's really beautiful example of craftsmanship and bookbinding. Here we see here epigrams on woman, love, and beauty, collected and edited by this chap called G.F. Monkshood. Nice border as well in another color, red. You have the red and the black printing. H.M. Caldwell and Co. And then people can read, if they wish, the preface here and on the next page. Yeah, really interesting collection of epigrams on the subject of woman and women. It's kind of half beautiful, laudatory epigrams, and then the other half is kind of cynical and critical in a very amusing way. So we can see an example of some of the ones on the first page here. I really like that one I've marked. The whisper of a beautiful woman can be heard further than the loudest calls of duty. Anonymous. Yeah, it's a really interesting little book. I'd recommend people pick up. And then just to end, the volume before that, if we go back to the number 9, I believe the image is another volume by this guy, because I read this book and I was really interested in him. So I found out he's wrote a small handful of other books that aren't translations. And there's another one called The Cynic's Posy, which is a really small volume. You can see here just below the one we were just looking at. And this is a very cynical, as it suggests, collection of epigrams on all sorts of subjects. And there's no copies of this that I can find physically or even online. So if you're looking this up, you won't even find a digital copy anywhere. So I'm not going to reveal too much about it, but it's very amusing. And if you can track down a copy, I'd highly recommend it. And just to call out, there's another book by Monkshood I'm looking for called Worldling's Wit. That one also I can't find any copies of online or to buy. So if anyone has a copy of that one, please get in contact with me if you'd like to sell it. I'd love to buy it and complete this.
Could you spell the title?
Monkshood's works. Yeah, so that's the Cynic's Posy. Oh, of the book I'm looking for. Yeah, so that's The Worldling's Wit. So it's WORLDING ''SWIT, Worldling's Wit.
Do you have the year for the Cynic's Posy and the Worldling's Wit?
Cynic's Posy is here published in 1904. Worldling's Wit, I don't have the date on. I don't even think I can find that information about it, but probably a similar time, early 1900s.
And what about the author for these two?
Yeah, so it's G.F. Monkshood. So that's G.F. Monkshood is MONKSHOOD. We also saw him previously in the small collection of passages from Edgar Saltus in the main bookcase. So I bought that, which I managed to find a copy of as well. So he's collected a bunch of passages from the American novelist Edgar Saltus. Beautiful passages. So yeah, we can end there. But maybe actually if we go back to one of the art shots.
Do you want to pause here, or you? Because we have the uncut pages thing.
Oh yeah, let's discuss those. Thanks for reminding me, Timothy. Yeah, let's quickly go to the uncut pages shots, which I forgot to bring up when we we're looking through the main bookcase. So this book is a connection here because these aren't photos of the Woman and Her Wits book, but that book, Woman and Her Wits, I believe it was the first book I was looking at to buy that had uncut pages. So I'd mentioned these previously for anyone who isn't aware. This is what an uncut page looks like. So from the binder back in the day, especially, the pages were kind of not cut, which they are in the modern days, which would leave you with 2 or more pages, sometimes bound, or put together, as you see here. This is on, if you're looking at a book here, the very side page edges are touching and connected. So you can see there a little hint of my letter opener, which I used to cut open the pages. But for anyone who wants a really nice physical aspect or wants to experience a really nice physical aspect of a book, if you go on 8 books and in the keywords field type in uncut pages, you might find or manage to pick up, some really cheap books that have uncut pages. You can have some fun, yourself physically tearing those open, which is a lot of fun. Yeah, really interesting. There's only a finite amount of those, right? So, there's only a certain amount of these old books that have uncut pages, and then you're kind of the last person in a long line of people, from the writer to the printer to the publisher. Who knows how many houses and households and previous owners it's been through, and then you're gain this book, and if you're the last one and you open them, the story's kind of complete with you completing the physical journey of the book. This is just the remnants of some particularly thick pages which I opened. You can see here it's kind of shreds. It looks like almost of pages. Yeah, just a really interesting aspect of physical books, which people can enjoy.
Okay, so that wraps up our segment on dark academia and the secret history. So we're jumping back in here to just add one final piece on this dark academia section.
Yes, this is from Monkshood's Worldling's Wit. Not Worldling's Wit, Woman and Her Wits, which we just discussed. This is how I'd like to close the section. So we see here one of my favorite quotations, especially from the book as well. So this is by Husay. So he's saying, "The one who has read the book that's called Woman knows more than the one who has grown pale in libraries." So I think that's a beautiful passage to end on.
Okay, so we'll end there for our dark academia section. All right, so we're now doing a section on art, a number of different paintings. And so we're going to start here with Diogenes. And what do you want to say about this one?
Yeah, so just some kind of prefatory notes. So there's a quote, which is one of my favorites about art by Oscar Wilde. So he says, "There's nothing that art cannot express, no mood or passion that art cannot give us. It is through art and art only that we can realize our perfection." So that kind of summarizes my feelings and views on art. And if we start with Jerome here, so Jean-Léon Jerome, so that's Jeanleongerome. He was a French painter born in 1824. And I want to read his comment on art, which he said at the time. So, during the last decade of his career, his own work kind of fell out of fashion, and he was really harshly critical of Impressionism. And in 1894, he kind of caused a scandal over his opposition to Impressionism. And he organized a public demonstration in his atelier, and he gave various interviews to reporters. And these are his words, which he gave to the journal L'Éclair. So that's Leclair. So these are his own words now. So Jean-Léon Jerome said, "The Institut de France cannot remain still before such a scandal. How can the government dare welcome such a collection of inanities into a museum? Why, have you seen the collection, the state, the word of such junk? What lessons are our young artists going to receive from now on? They'll all start to do Impressionism. Ah, these people believe they're painting nature, nature so admirable in its manifestation. What pretension! Nature is not for them. This Monet, do you remember his cathedrals? And that man used to know how to paint. Yes, I've seen good things by him, but nah." So he's being kind of delivering a harshly critical attack of Impressionism specifically back 200 years ago. But I can have similar views, and I think most people these days, especially if they're interested in classical literature, will probably have similar feelings and sentiments towards the modern art we see these days, Banana taped to a wall, etc., Jackson Pollock. So yeah, what I just wanted to do this section briefly is just give people an idea of the kind of amazing artwork and paintings, especially that are out there, because I didn't know any of this stuff existed when I was taught art in school. We were just taught Jackson Pollock and other people like that. So this is one of my favorite artists, Jean-Léon Jerome, and this is his depiction of Diogenes the Cynic, who we've mentioned before. Just his style is what I would classify as very classical in style. And you see the detail, especially on the fur of these dogs. But yeah, just a beautiful snapshot. Yeah, you can really see the detail here. Look at that. A lot of these classical painters as well painted many historical scenes and figures. So that's another thing people may find interesting, especially if you have an interest in ancient Greece and Rome. You'll see many familiar figures. And the Bible as well, you'll see many religious depictions, sometimes very beautiful. Yeah, just look at the fur. Yeah, I also have Pinterest, which Timothy will link and which people can go to, where I've kind of systematized some of the best art that I've ever seen. So people can take a look there if you want a more ordered view, just to have a look around at some of the things that you may never have even known was put down on wood or paper or in sculptural form. Yeah, this is Jerome's Diogenes. Then we have another interesting painting by Jerome. So as well as classical Western history and scenes. He was also kind of prolific painting Eastern depictions. So this is a beautiful painting called The Prayer at the Mosque. If you zoom in here, just look at this detail. It's captured a very vivid scene where there's these pigeons flying, and look at the detail of the architecture as well here, the columns. Um, the detail on those group of pigeons there, and the slabs on the floor as well. It's kind of the more you zoom in, the more you can get absorbed into this world. Yeah, Jean-Léon Gérôme kind of embodies a style of painting known as neoclassicism and academicism. So neoclassicism was a reaction against the ornate Baroque and Rococo styles, inspired by ancient Greek and Roman ideals that emphasize clarity, order, symmetry, restraint, heroism, and moral virtue. So some other painters people may be familiar with are Jacques-Louis David and Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres. So the first one is Louis David, that's Louis David. He's very famous for his ancient Roman paintings. And then Dominique Ingres, that's Dominque space Ingres. So these guys focus on very precise drawing of idealized forms and subjects from classical history and mythology. Just the richness of color and the detail here. Just a quick note on academicism, which is another movement I really like, along with neoclassicism. So academicism was primarily in the 19th century, and it was the official art style promoted by European art academies, especially the French Académie des Beaux-Arts. And academicism upheld a strict technical standard and hierarchy of genres, with history painting as the highest. And it idealized beauty based on classical models, so it was closely tied to neoclassicism. And it became very conservative and some people would say formulaic, but it definitely opposed romanticism and later avant-garde movements. So if people want to whack into Google neoclassicism and academicism, you'll see some really beautiful paintings along these styles. Yeah, just beautiful. Okay, even I'm surprised. Looking over this again with the detail here. Look at that, the clothing on these people. And again, it's a relatively small part of the painting, right? If you look how large the scene depicted in this painting is and the minute details that Gérôme's beautifully painted here, a shadow as well. Different color of the clothing. Just really beautiful. It's almost brought to life. There's many Eastern Oriental depictions that Gérôme painted for anyone that is interested in this one specifically. Got damage on the columns as well, all the wear on the columns, indentations. Yeah, really beautiful. Yeah, this kind of characterizes the type of painting I like. Classical in style and classical themes or ancient historical or mythological or religious themes. Lots of architecture, interesting architectural depictions to be found in paintings as well, which we'll see a little later. Yeah, you see, it's a blend of kind of everything. You got animals, you got people, you got architecture. Just beautiful piece. So yeah, that's Jean-Léon Gérôme. So let's flick through the next one which is a series of paintings by John William Godward, I believe, yeah? So we have here, this is by an artist called John William Godward, another one of my absolute favorites. So Godward was an English painter born in 1871, and this kind of, and the next couple you can flick through, Timothy, kind of characterize his style. So he was really fond of depicting these kind of beautiful women in classical, almost ancient Greek or Roman dress, sometimes just doing completely idle or kind of everyday things you see. And if we zoom in on this one, let's zoom in on look at that pelt. Is that a leopard pelt or a cheetah pelt or something? Just look at the detail on this is just absolutely insane. To think this was done with a paintbrush 200 years ago or, 150, 200 years ago, it's really insane. And yeah, he's kind of known for his detail of animal pelts, Godward. But yeah, just beautiful and stunning and just it boggles my mind anyway. Someone did this with their hand and physical paint and a paintbrush on, wood or canvas, whatever the backing material was for this. Just insanely detailed and beautiful. The detail on the hair of this woman as well. So this one's called When the Heart is Young. You see here beautiful figures he painted and many of these other neoclassical and academic painters were fond of depicting. Even the detail here, you see that blush on her cheek, the lips, and the fur or the texture of the animal pelts just over her face. And the ruffles on her clothing as well. Look at that. It's not a toga, is it? But whatever you want to call this clothing she's wearing. Look at the detail here. Again, depicted with a paintbrush. It's insane. You can even see here, if you zoom in, the outline of her arm here, and then the clothing is going over that kind of transparently. Again, this just completely boggles my mind looking at this thing this is done with a paintbrush is just insane, I find anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been considered one of the marks of a genius is their ability
Mm,
to do the crinkling and the
mm,
folds of fabric, but then to add the translucence to it and the light
mm,
is just taking it to a whole nother level.
yeah. And the detail on the stone, the marble, possibly there, you see the veins as well. And it's kind of nothing in this painting is left untreated in terms of detail. It's just amazing. That must have been really difficult to do as well, how the design on her lower item of clothing there is folded. You see that blue design, how he's incorporated the folds into that. Then sweeping down to her legs, again, more of the texture of the fabric. Yeah, you can just, this is a really good way to view the artwork, Timothy, just zooming in here, going section by section. It's beautiful. You completely lose yourself in this. And the marbles, the mosaic at the bottom. And that peacock feather fan as well. Look at that. Again, as well as the leopard pelt. The detail on that peacock fan. Just amazing. Yeah, this is one of my favorite artists, and a lot of his paintings are along a similar theme. It's kind of a classical depictions in terms of setting and these really beautiful female figures. Similar things here. Yeah, look, she's kind of amusing herself by getting the is that a tortoise or a turtle to eat these cherries here. This one's called The Idle Pet by Godward. Yeah, I'm really fond of his style. Kind of similar to Alma Tadema we mentioned previously with the roses of Heliogabalus we saw. It's kind of classical setting and semi-fictional historical depictions of subjects. Excuse me, this one's the one that's called The Idle Pet by Godward. The previous one was called Idleness. Oh no, that's the wrong way around, excuse me. This is called Idleness. I was right the first time. Yeah, look at that detail on that peacock feather there. And the individual strands, that's just amazing. I always think in things that have this level of detail, what if you made a mistake? We really have to start over again? Or I'm sure they could repaint or make another layer, but even still, it's just amazing. Yeah, beautiful depiction. Yeah, a far cry from the modern stuff we see in galleries today. Excuse me. This one's called 18 and 80, which I think is a very amusing title. So you see here on the left, this 80-year-old man and then an 18-year-old lady on the right. You see his signature there, John William Godward, 1898.
Do you have a sense of how large these are? The canvas?
Most likely the size of a large wall in your home, I believe, or half the size, depending on how large your walls are. Maybe a couple of meters by a couple of meters, or 3 or 4 meters by 1 or 2 meters. So relatively large, I'm sure, most of these. Definitely larger than, an A4 size or anything like that. Yeah, again, just look at that detail on that tiger paw, especially near the bottom there. Just beautiful. Yeah, so again, just want to hopefully open people's eyes if they aren't aware of this sort of art and they're only familiar with, kind of the modern stuff in galleries and museums today. Even her look there, look at how you could interpret what she's thinking or looking at there. Then you got those mountains in the background or cliff sides. Yeah, beautiful paintings by Godward here.
All right, so we're going to move over to the next image here.
Yes, so this is a beautiful painting by an Italian artist called Pompeo Batoni. So that's Pompeobatoni. He was born in 1708, and another one of my favorite artists and painters in particular. And he's got this really beautiful and amazing allegorical paintings. So this painting here is called Allegory of the Arts. You can see here the various arts allegorized into human form by Batoni. So we try and think, we likely have poetry, music, architecture, painting, and sculpture, most likely. But I really like this as a genre if people weren't aware that things like this exist. There's a whole genre of paintings where it's allegory of X, so allegory of the arts in this case, allegory of justice, allegory of virtue, allegory of the French War. I think there's paintings like that which also have a historical context to them. Yeah, you can really delve deep on some of the allegorical paintings that people made, especially some of the ones that aren't more obvious like this one, because it's very clear what this is depicting and what each person means. But there's some allegories like Allegory of Peace, for example. You can think about, why is the painter chosen to depict peace in this way? What does this object symbolize? What does that object symbolize? But again, in terms of style, you see it's more classical in style, this one, and this painter, Bertoni. But just really beautiful paintings. One of my favorite painters. And again, this is 300 years ago. You compare this to stuff we see today, especially in galleries, if we forget about the artificial intelligence for a minute. The detail and color and choreography or composition is the painting correct term, I guess. Just amazing what people did with some paint and a brush and some wood or canvas hundreds of years ago. It's really beautiful. Yeah, this is just one example I wanted to show people of Bertoni's paintings. And I think these sorts of styles and subjects really go in line with, as I mentioned before, the classic literature, the great books, things like this, ancient Greece, Rome, history, philosophy. Yeah, beautiful allegories that Bertoni painted. You're zooming in so much that even I haven't looked at these paintings in this level of detail, Timothy. I'm going to have to kind of do a deep dive on some of my favorites, actually, because, those eyes and some of the details I may have overlooked is because that's another thing to mention. So, I've been lucky to visit some museums and galleries, obviously, but, to the average person online, similar to me, the way that most people interact with these is just through a screen. So unless you find a super high resolution image, sometimes you can't zoom in on some of these details, or maybe you just don't think to. But yeah, definitely do so if you find a very high quality image or are lucky to see these in person.
I think it's kind of interesting that and I'm just speculating, that this woman represents the mathematical and
Yeah, very likely.
geometric patterns. And this triangle here, what I tend to do in each painting is try to find these
triangle. Yeah.
Yeah, these paintings tend to actually have like a lot of geometry.
Yeah.
And it's almost like really surprising, actually, when you first learn about it and how these were planned out. You have sort of the triangle of the easel here, and just there's probably like 10 different triangles or 20 different triangles hidden in here somehow. And so her being in the shadow, but at the top, kind of represents the hidden mathematics of what's seemingly very flowing and very soft and organic. Even like the lines of the wires here. You can sort of identify a line through which to trace through and read, like the eyes kind of tell you where to go. And so that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, that's an aspect I'd never even considered all the times I've looked at this painting, which reminds me as well, if you even discuss these with a friend or group of friends or even online, the few times I've done that with some good friends, it's really interesting to see what they have to say because they'll pick up on things which I never either paid attention to or just dismissed as kind of not important. So again, I never would have really focused or thought about that aspect that you just talked about, Timothy. So really interesting hearing you say that.
What do you pick up here?
I just take it in as a one whole painting. I don't really focus on the detail with this one. I just take it all as an allegory of the arts. So I really like just the overall allegorical nature of the work. But if I'm looking detail, mainly the clothing and the physical objects we see there, like the bust and the books and the easel is what I would focus on.
I was trying to figure out what this is.
I was going to say as well, it might possibly be, is it possibly a gavel, maybe? I think one
People
of
can let us know in the comments what's going on here.
Yeah. Actually, I think I know what that is, if you want me to spoil it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it might be a hammer, especially since that bust is just next to her. She may be an allegory of a sculpture, so that could be possibly some sort of hammering tool to aid the sculptor in producing the final piece.
What about these things right here?
Yeah, I'm not gonna embarrass myself and guess what those are, but if I had to guess, I would say they're a similar sculptural tool, but they don't look like it, do they? Yeah, I'm not sure what those are, to be honest. Yeah, just a beautiful painting. And again, Bertoni has many allegorical depictions. So if you enjoy this, please type in Bertoni allegorical. You'll find lots of other examples.
And which one do you want to go to next?
Let's just go in order with the rest of them.
Okay.
So let's see what we have after the Godward ones. So we have a very famous sculpture called the Laocoon or Laocoon. So this was produced in ancient Greece, believe it or not, around 200 BC. So we're talking 2,200 years ago. I mean, let's just stop and take that in. To think that this masterpiece of form and detail was produced by an ancient Greek, possibly 2,200 years ago, is insane to me. Blows my mind. Absolutely. I believe this is currently housed in the Vatican museums. I was lucky enough to see this in person, and it's depicting a relatively famous story from Troy. So Laocoon was, I believe he knew that the famous Trojan horse was kind of a trick. So he was kind of warning the Greeks, and he threw a spear right into the horse to bring attention. But the gods who were favoring not Laocoon but the other side, they sent these big serpents to ravage and kill him and his sons here, who you see. You see that moment of killing depicted right here, where him and his sons are being killed from some divinely sent serpents. So I believe he actually said, I believe in Virgil, he says, beware Greeks bearing gifts. I believe that's spoken by this figure here, Laocoon, in Virgil's Aeneid. So the gods favoring Greece sent these serpents to attack and kill him for trying to warn his people. Yeah, just what blows my mind about this is that it was made 2,200 years ago. And I believe it was also Pliny the Younger, who we mentioned previously. I have an Oxford World Classics section of his letters. Pliny the Younger had I believe it was an uncle called Pliny the Elder. So he wrote what you could consider the earliest encyclopedia called Natural History or Naturalia Historia, I think is the Latin name. And actually, it was either his uncle or maybe it was Pliny the Younger himself. One of the two, either way, mention this work actually in their letters. So you get a first-hand account of this in Pliny, either the younger or the elder. So it was then, I believe, buried or covered up for roughly 1500 years, and then this was re-excavated around the year 1500. They found this in Rome, I believe, or possibly Greece. But again, it's beautiful. Just look at the detail on everything, you know. Their expressions as well, actually. You probably already zoomed in on those, but look at the the expressions on each of these three figures. You know, you can really captures that moment of dread and terror. Look at that. He's on this son here, looking at his father almost to help, possibly pleading. Maybe he knows his fate is sealed and he's about to die, but just the emotions captured in this piece of stone is amazing. And relatively large as well, right? I'm not just talking about one figure here. It's three figures all interconnected by this beautiful twining snake that's wrapping around all three of them. Yeah, just a beautiful sculpture. Yeah, you can almost hear this scene, if you're looking at people looking over this, you can almost, at least to me, when I'm looking over, zooming in on this Timothy, it's like it's like I'm almost there, right in the center of the action, Loads of people behind me, all these Trojans, and then the serpent being sent down. I'm kind of dramatizing in my head of thunder and lightning going off and some waves crashing against some rocks as well, but it's kind of emphasize the dramatic nature. But yeah, just a beautiful sculpture, thousands of years old, amazing. Yeah, one of my favorites. And this was held very highly by many artists and thinkers throughout time. I believe there's a German author slash artist called Winkelmann, and I believe he described this as something like, the summit or the apex of sculpture. So it's a very famous and very highly regarded sculptural work here. So if we shift back into paintings, this is just an example of Impressionism I wanted to show people in case anyone wasn't aware. So Jean-Léon Gérôme, that passage I read out at the beginning, he was railing against this type of art, which was very sadly popular at the time or getting popularized. And, you compare this. I wanted to ask you, Timothy, actually, with this. What's your impression of this, if you pardon the pun? Do you hold this in high esteem? Do you like it? What do you think of it when you see stuff
I
like this?
mean, I think this is sort of an interesting example to choose from Impressionism because this is almost like the most boring Impressionist painting I've ever seen. I'm just a little bit tongue in cheek, but
Sure.
I think the reason for it is because it's an exercise in light, and so this was like a genre, and there was even a whole thing between, I think, like landscapes versus people, and
Yeah.
and I know there's a whole set of paintings that are these haystacks, so it's not just a totally random thing, but yeah, I think it's really studying the light and studying a sunset. And it makes me think of the countryside in France.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I have a whole theory of art, which I mentioned previously. I'll expand on that at some later date in video or text form. But I completely agree with Jerome here. I mean, however nice this might be, I don't think it belongs in a museum at all. This type of stuff, when Jackson Pollock, yeah, you can put it as your phone screensaver or on your desktop screensaver, or if your child bought this home and said, "Look, mommy, daddy, look what I've painted," I'll be like, "Oh, that's pretty good." But to compare it with some of the stuff we've just been looking at, I think is a ridiculous notion, personally speaking. Again, I do agree with you. It is nice and it does inspire some sentiment and emotion in me. But again, if we're talking like, or if we're taking the hierarchical view, I think this is definitely at least one step below the styles that we've been looking at. But that's just my opinion. People, I'm sure, will rail against me in the comments. Yeah, I just wanted to show people an example of what Jerome and myself kind of rail against and attack. So if we get back to the good stuff now, this is my favorite depiction of Danae. So this is a depiction of a famous story from Greek mythology where Zeus, the kind of infamous adulterer, sleeps with this lady Danae, so that's Danae, in the form of a shower of gold. He appeared to her here. And there's many depictions of Danae, but I just wanted to include this as I think it's one of the lesser known depictions, possibly. There's many, we're talking dozens of depictions of Danae depicted, but this, in my opinion, is the greatest of them all. Just beautiful in nature, and the shower of gold is really beautiful as well. The detail on those gold pieces showering down is really something to behold. So this is by an artist called Orazio Gentileschi. So that's Orazio, Orazio Gentileschi is Gentileschi. There's also an Artemisia Gentileschi, so I can't recall if they were brother and sister or they're related somehow. But yeah, these two pair of people produce some amazing paintings. Yeah, this is my favorite depiction of Danae. And if we move along, so this is a pair of paintings again, one of my favorite pair of paintings by an artist called Panini, like the sandwich. That's Panini, an Italian artist. And these two series of paintings, this one here, is called Ancient Rome, I believe, or possibly Modern Rome. And then the other one is vice versa. So one of these paintings is called Ancient Rome, or a gallery of ancient Rome, or a view of ancient Rome. And the other is called a gallery or a view of modern Rome. And this is a painting, it's kind of an inception or inceptional, I don't know what the right term is there in nature. So this is a painting, but it's actually depicting other real paintings. So I believe every single one of the paintings or sculptures you see here are actually real paintings and sculptures. So the artist here, Panini, has painted other famous paintings and sculptures. There's Apollo and Daphne in the back, that sculpture there. I think a depiction of David. It's the sculpture on the right there. Possibly by Bernini, but yeah, just an amazing masterwork here of painting and skill. This goes beyond, I think, even the previous ones we looked at with Godward. The level of detail to, first of all, you're reproducing in miniature a masterpiece yourself, but then to do that dozens of times over in the same painting, with absolute mastery and aplomb, it's just this one completely boggles my mind anyway. And yeah, again, you've got everything here, not just people, mythology, history, but architectural detail as well. Look at that. I mean, it's amazingly recreated. There's a nice view of the Vatican there.
Hieroglyphics.
Yeah, just amazing. And again, something I was completely unaware of even existed. But yeah, an amazing masterpiece by Panini. I think this is a view of modern Rome, just looking at the pictures here. Maybe you can tell me, Timothy, can you see the file name of this one?
Panini Modern Romm.
Yeah. So this is the modern Rome, and then the next one we'll shift to is Ancient Rome. So you can see all the artwork in this painting is around the Renaissance onwards, it looks like. There's a few versions of both of these paintings as well. I think if people look on the Wikipedia pages of these, I think there's 3 variants that he painted, all very slightly different. Yeah, just an absolute masterpiece. Then you have the whole thing. It looks like the title page of an extremely large illustrated book almost, doesn't it? Because it looks black and white.
Yeah.
So that's modern Rome. And then here we have ancient Rome. Yeah, you can see here, look at the difference in subjects. You see more ancient sculptures. Oh, yeah, you see right there, yeah, the Lacan we have depicted. Look at that. So he's recreated that. in miniature form. Another thing's famous columns of the Temple of Castor and Pollux.
So it shows
Lots
us
of
what
other
we're
things.
missing in terms of the snake coming over the shoulder.
Yeah, and interesting. So related to that as well, in the show Borgia, which we mentioned previously, there's a scene in that show where, or that depicts the excavation of this amazing sculpture, and the Pope Alexander VI, he tells his artists to complete the sculpture, so to add the missing pieces, and then later on in the last episode of season 1, I believe, at the very end, he says, "This is as it should be," and he breaks them off with his hand, returning it to the state we have it in today. Yeah, again, it's an absolute masterpiece and masterwork by Panini here. That's something else to note as well. So I mentioned this is a pair of paintings, and you see many other painters producing either a pair or sometimes more, a pair, trio, quadrupler, or a whole series of paintings, either depicting the same or related subjects. There's a famous series whose artist name I can't recall now. It's depicting the kind of degradation of a city, kind of in line with Gibbon's Decline and Fall. I don't know if you know those, Timothy, but I see those online and on Twitter every now and again. Starts with a city, beautiful and pristine, and everything's good, and then slowly, shows it degrading in the next paintings with thunder and lightning and wars and things like this. Yeah, beautiful painting. And do we have a few more?
We have just this last Rembrandt.
Okay. Yeah, beautiful painting to finish on. So this is by Rembrandt, and this is Aristotle with a bust of Homer. Again, very strong tie-in with classical literature and ancient Greece and Rome in many, many, many of these paintings by painters 200 years ago. But yeah, I really love this portrait. Very calm and meditative in nature. Definitely one to buy a reproduction of for your office or study or library. I've never really thought much about this actually, but did Aristotle have a lot to say about Homer? I read Aristotle a very long time ago, so I'm not really sure
Not
if there's
sure.
yeah, because he talks about tragedy. So I was thinking one of the Aeschylus, Sophocles, or Euripides might have been a better depiction, or maybe Rembrandt's depicting here just two towering figures, one of philosophy, one of poetry. I'll look into this. Yeah, just a beautifully depicted painting here by Rembrandt. Yeah, so if people want to learn more, just look up art yourself. Please don't just think it's limited. Please don't think art is just limited to people like Pollock and the modern stuff you see online. And if you want to have a look at other paintings I enjoy or want a more systematic exploration, please do have a look at my Pinterest. So that's pinterest.com/the true aesthete.
Okay, so this concludes our third major session, and we'll have more to come in terms of overhead shot video and answering any questions people have in the comments.
Yeah, please. That's a good point to make, Timothy. Yeah, please, if anyone has any comments or questions on anything they've seen, especially the books that I own, please do leave a comment and let me know. I don't know if you want to touch on this a bit more, Timothy, excuse me, but we did mention we'll be doing a future video featuring overhead shots. So if anyone has anything in particular, whether that's an aspect of a book or a particular book in general, you'd really like us to focus on and discuss, please do let us know in a comment, because this video is going to be much shorter than this one. So we'll have a much shorter amount of time we're going to play with. So, if there's any physical aspects of the books you'd like to see, so watermarks, for example, or book plates, inscriptions, types of paper, typography, or as I mentioned, a particular book, please do let us know in a comment and we can focus our video around those things that people mention.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, and we'll wrap up here.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Timothy. Great discussion, and happy to help anyone who wants to reach out.